Chapter 1148. If the heavenly God was allowed to continue like this, the entire kingdom of God would gradually collapse, and the entire river system would be completely destroyed. Everything that existed in the river system would also disappear. Although this did not pose much pressure to Luo Fan, he was still unwilling to see this scene, especially when he could change the result with just a little effort from him. With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and pointed at the Empyrean that had almost turned into a galaxy. In an instant, a strange wave enveloped the Empyrean and washed away all the distracting thoughts in his mind, freeing the Empyrean from being stuck in a dead end. As the Empyrean was freed from despair, the Empyrean's body gradually changed from a galaxy to a giant. In other words, he had returned to the appearance of an Empyrean. After the Empyrean recovered, he was in a daze and couldn't react for a long time. What just happened? He murmured. Finally, all the things that happened before echoed in his mind. In an instant, he broke out in cold sweat, and an expression of extreme fear appeared on his face. He bowed to Luo Fan and said, "Thank you, Immortal, for saving us. If it weren't for you, I don't know how many billions of lives in the nation of God would have been destroyed." Luo Fan waved his hand lightly and said, "There's no need to say more. The matter is settled. Take care of yourself. I'm leaving." With that, he couldn't be bothered to care about the Empyrean anymore. He lifted his foot and stomped on the ground. The crystal dragon under his feet flashed and shrank into a three-dimensional talisman the size of a palm. He put it into the universe in his sleeve. Then he tore open the void and lifted his right foot. He was about to step into the center of a universe, where the demonic aura was the thickest. Immortal, wait. At this moment, the Empyrean suddenly shouted. Luo Fan originally didn't want to bother with the Empyrean, but he suddenly felt a strange aura coming from behind him. What is this? Luo Fan was taken aback. He stopped and looked back, only to see a strange thing in the heavenly God's hand. This thing seemed to be invisible and intangible. However, it also exuded an extremely realistic charm, as if it was the most realistic existence in the universe. This is a strange thing that happened in the center of the kingdom of God. None of the scientific methods could analyze it, so it must have something to do with technology. Immortals have saved our entire kingdom. We have no way to thank you. I will use this item to express my gratitude. I hope that Immortal will not reject it. Luo Fan stopped in the heavenly God room and quickly said. Luo Fan raised his hand and waved it gently. The item in the hand of the heavenly God, which was invisible and intangible, but emitted an incomparably real aura, directly appeared in his hand. This is not a material from Earth's universe. Luo Fan instantly made a preliminary judgment on this object, although this thing was invisible and formless. However, the aura was so strong that Luo Fan could easily see the outline of the object and even had a rough idea of its nature. The creature itself looked like a cloud of smoke. Its shape was constantly changing. No matter which direction one looked at it from, it didn't have a fixed shape. That kind of incomparably real aura. It was emitted from the depths of every bit of this object. It was the aura of hundreds of millions of this object. The reason why Luo Fan said that this object was not a material from Earth's universe. There was no other reason. It was because there was no trace of the laws of Earth's universe contained in this object. At this time, Luo Fan was already a Dao master in the profound realm. Although he couldn't say that he knew all the laws of Earth's universe, he had a general impression of them. As for whether the laws of Earth's universe belonged to Earth's universe, he knew at a glance. Under such circumstances, it was natural to know at a glance whether the laws of Earth's universe contained in the object in front of him belonged to Earth's universe. If it's not from Earth's universe, could it be from the Devil realm? Such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. After this thought, he couldn't help but feel an inexplicable joy. Ever since he knew that there were devil sages in the Devil realm who were different from the 7 sages of Earth's universe, Luo Fan had been looking forward to the Devil realm. However, whether it was from the memory of Divine Sun or Tian Hunzi, he only knew that they had entered the Devil realm. He had no idea what they had experienced in the Devil realm or what it looked like in the Devil realm. Under such circumstances, he suddenly obtained a bit of material belonging to the devil realm. How lucky and wonderful was that? This object is quite useful to me. I'll accept it, Luo Fan said lightly. As long as you like it. The divine god was overjoyed and said, Well, don't talk nonsense. If you have any requests, just say it. Luo Fan directly interrupted him and said, To give this object to him out of gratitude. Only an extremely naive person would believe such words. How could Luo Fan be deceived by such words? The moment this heavenly god took out this material, Luo Fan knew that he must have a request for giving this material at this time. With Luo Fan's strength, if he wanted to snatch this object and leave, the nation of God wouldn't be able to do anything. However, why would he do that? No matter what the divine god wanted, it didn't matter to Luo Fan. Since that was the case, why would he go against his own principles for such a small benefit? Hearing Luo Fan's words, the heavenly god looked very embarrassed, but he still said, Just now, after listening to a mortal's words, I look forward to the absolute truth even more. So I want to ask a mortal to teach me the method to directly come into contact with the absolute truth. I hope you can grant my request. Teach you the method to come into contact with the Grand Tao. When Luo Fan heard this, he frowned. Of course, it was not because it was too difficult, but because the risk was too great for a celestial god. Have you really thought it through? If you learn the method I teach you, you'll leave the technological civilization and enter the cultivation civilization. From then on, you'll become a cultivator that all the countries in the universe want to kill. This consequence, have you thought of it? Luo Fan said indifferently. The divine god's expression was one of struggle. But in the end, he made up his mind. I've thought it through. In order to obtain the absolute truth, any price is worth it. Even if it means the destruction of the entire country, it's worth it. What a fanatical country. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. This decision seemed to have been made by the god himself, but it was actually made by all the living beings in the kingdom of God, as well as the entire population. In other words, out of the trillions of living beings in the nation of God, most of them were willing to risk the destruction of all the countries in the universe just to learn the method Luo Fan taught them, to truly come into contact with the absolute truth. The quality of the people here was truly unimaginable. Since you decided, I'll fulfill your wish. Then I will fulfill your wish. Luo Fan laughed. As he spoke, he casually pointed at the divine god. In an instant, a wave of information directly penetrated through the void and entered the divine god's mind, directly merging with the huge world in his head. This bit of information was completely different from the memories the divine god had before. It was as if it had a life of its own. In this huge world, although it seemed insignificant, it emitted an indescribable light. It enveloped the entire world, causing the appearance of the entire world to gradually change along with the light. The wills and memories of all living beings that originally existed in this world gradually calmed down, allowing the will of the heavenly God itself to gradually take over the main body, causing its eyes to become clearer and clearer. After this transformation, the divine God floated in the air blankly. He blankly floated in the air for a long time before he let out a long sigh. So, this is what cultivation is all about. He muttered. As he muttered, a huge thundercloud gradually appeared above his head. The divine God himself was as huge as a dozen galaxies. This thundercloud was thousands of times larger than the divine God, and it floated above the divine God's head. It was practically covering the sky and the earth. After the thunderclouds appeared, they didn't even need to be brewed. Countless bolts of lightning struck down from the thunderclouds and directly bombarded the heavenly God's body and the world above his head. At this moment, the divine God let out a loud roar. He opened his hands and pulled the world above his head, then suddenly closed them together. The world quickly shrank, and in the blink of an eye, it had shrunk to the size of his head. Then he stuffed the entire world into his head. The entire world was directly stuffed into his head, completely fusing with the world inside his head, turning the world inside his head from illusory to real, becoming a real world. After this change, the lightning that bombarded the original world lost its target, and the direction of the bombardment shifted to the divine God. The divine God endured the bombardment of the lightning, and his entire body constantly trembled in the void. Faintly, he even showed signs of being injured. However, no matter how injured he was, he didn't look like he did when he fought against Luo Fan. The stars, planets, and even living beings in the entire galaxy didn't suffer any damage. It was as if the divine God had been cut off from the entire galaxy. However, in reality, Luo Fan could see at a glance that the relationship between the divine God and the entire galaxy wasn't cut off. On the contrary, it had become even closer. He actually broke through the mortal realm and became an itinerant immortal so easily. It's so easy to cultivate with the will of a planet. Luo Fan looked at the divine God and secretly praised him. Everything that was happening in front of him was clearly the result of the divine God's natural evolution after Luo Fan transmitted some of the methods to get in touch with the great Tao into his mind. With this method, the divine God directly broke through his limits and entered the immortal realm from the mortal realm. The divine God was the condensation of the will of a planet and possessed all the energy of the entire galaxy. In terms of the amount of energy he contained, even Luo Fan couldn't compare to him. However, he was a creation of science and technology after all. If he were to be classified according to the realm of cultivation, he would still be a mere mortal without any cultivation. Even if this mortal could destroy an ordinary peak quasi-sage, he was still a mortal. And such a mortal, no matter how strong he was, couldn't come into contact with the great Tao. This was the absolute truth that the divine God had mentioned. Only by improving the essence of his life and transcending mortality could he become an immortal. Only then could he possibly come into contact with the great Tao and the absolute truth. And this was what the divine God had just triggered. This was the tribulation of becoming an immortal. As long as he survived this tribulation, he would break through the limits of a mortal and step into the immortal realm. The reason why he was able to do it so quickly and easily was because he was essentially the condensation of the will of a planet. The energy he possessed was terrifying beyond the limits of what could be described with numbers. In this universe, the nature of a superpower had already reached an extremely high level. It had almost merged with the laws of the entire universe. Under such circumstances, this was the highest decision made by many superpowers. It had already become one of the basic laws of this universe. In other words, the rejection of cultivators and the merciless desire to kill them had already become one of the basic laws of this universe. Under such circumstances, the power of the immortal ascension tribulation that the divine God encountered was billions of times stronger than that of an ordinary immortal ascension tribulation. The thunderbolts in the sky fell crazily and even condensed into various special forms in midair. This was different from the Earth universe or the untainted world. The thunderbolts condensed in midair were not lightning-type magic treasures, lightning-type deities, or lightning-type palaces. Instead, there were all kinds of technological creations that Luo Fan had seen and heard about. There were universe annihilation cannons, space-time remodeling devices, causality weapons, and so on. All kinds of shockingly powerful technological creations condensed in the midst of the thunderbolts. They unleashed their effects and continuously bombarded the divine God. Fortunately, the divine God himself was a technological creation that was more than one level higher than the space-time remodeling devices. Under the bombardment of the technological creations condensed from lightning, he remained unfazed and casually patted them. He casually pointed at them, but they were actually tightly guarded. No matter how powerful the technological creations were, they couldn't hurt him at all. This was the true strength of a heavenly God. This was the power of a heavenly God, the highest level of a kingdom of God. Previously, he had behaved like a good-for-nothing in front of Luo Fan and had been easily subdued, but that was only because Luo Fan was too powerful and had completely grasped his weakness. It did not mean that the power of this heavenly God was so weak. In the process of resisting the tribulation, the entire river system was gradually changing. Star systems disappeared into thin air one after another. When they reappeared, they appeared directly in the divine God's body, completely replacing the original stars that had existed in the divine God's body. Although the speed at which the stars were disappearing was extremely fast, there were just too many stars in the galaxy. Even at such a speed, it was still difficult to detect in the eyes of the entire galaxy, making it seem as if the galaxy had not changed at all. However, this was only in the eyes of mortals. For Luo Fan, any changes that occurred in the divine God's body were clearly seen by him. Truly absorbing the entire galaxy into my body? This is indeed the best way. Luo Fan couldn't help but praise the divine God inwardly when he saw all the changes. At this moment, what the divine God was doing was completely devouring the entire galaxy with his own strength. From then on, he would be the galaxy, and the galaxy would truly become him. The countless living beings that lived in the galaxy would truly become a part of his body, living freely in his body like they were before, and wouldn't be affected by this change. After this change, the divine God's own weakness would be weakened to the minimum, and he would also have the ability to move freely, no longer being fixed in place like before. This way, the divine God's safety would naturally be greatly improved. He wouldn't have to worry too much about being attacked by the superpowers in the future. At this time, Luo Fan's body was surrounded by a layer of three-dimensional talisman that could isolate all attacks. Naturally, it could also isolate his aura. Although the heaven and earth were covered by the tribulation clouds that crazily poured down thunder and lightning in a world-destroying manner, although it was extremely terrifying, it didn't discover his existence at all. Not even the slightest lightning was directed at him. This allowed him to be enveloped by the tribulation clouds, but he wasn't affected at all. He still calmly watched the divine God struggle under the tribulation clouds. The process of this tribulation lasted for quite a long time. It wasn't until more than 9 months later that the tribulation gradually dissipated. At this time, the entire galaxy that the divine God's country was in had completely disappeared. All the star systems in the entire galaxy had already been absorbed into the divine God's body. In the place where the galaxy originally was, there was only a divine God the size of a dozen star systems, and a less than 3 meters tall Luo Fan standing there. In the sky above the two of them, the tribulation clouds had become extremely thin. Although they were still trying their best to gather lightning and thunder, compared to the beginning, it was so weak that it was almost negligible. Seeing this, the divine God let out a loud roar filled with joy, raised his fist, and punched towards the sky. In an instant, the terrifying power directly broke through the barriers of time and space, directly bombarding the tribulation clouds that seemed to exist in another space. Although this power wasn't much different from the power that the divine God used in the past, in terms of quality, there was a fundamental difference. The fist was like a living thing. After blasting into the tribulation clouds, it began to move extremely nimbly, absorbing the tribulation clouds' power while destroying them. Chapter 1149. When everything calmed down, the celestial god quickly shrank. He shrank at an unimaginable speed. In a short while, he had shrunk from the size of dozens of galaxies to the same height as Luo Fan, less than 3 meters tall. He looked like an ordinary person. At this time, he was wearing the casual clothes of the commoners in the kingdom of God. It looked simple and casual, full of a sense of leisure. After transforming, the celestial god bowed to Luo Fan. "Thank you, immortal, for your help. Help? As long as you don't regret taking this path in the future." Luo Fan smiled faintly. "I feel like I'm closer to the absolute truth than ever. Even if I die, I won't have any regrets." The celestial god said, "That's good. Since you're satisfied with what I gave you, then do your best." Luo Fan smiled. As he spoke, he took a step forward and disappeared from the heavenly god's sight in an instant. The celestial god wanted to continue thanking Luo Fan, but he realized that in the blink of an eye, the immortal who had given him so much kindness had disappeared. He couldn't help but sigh. Compared to the technological civilization, the cultivation civilization seems to be even more vast. He murmured. Right now, he looked like an ordinary person less than 3 meters tall. But in reality, the space inside his body existed in a very mysterious way. All the stars in the galaxy were in his body, just like they were in the universe. Almost nothing had changed. Their lives were the same. There was no effect. The celestial god had just passed the tribulation to become an immortal, so his cultivation level was only equivalent to an itinerant immortal. But, just like the flame giant and other technological creations, although they weren't very strong, they were very powerful. In terms of power, this celestial god was even stronger than Luo Fan. Although this kind of power wasn't undefeatable in the universe, the only ones that could threaten him were the superpowers. Under these circumstances, the celestial god felt like he was standing on the opposite side of the superpowers. There was also the joy of finally obtaining freedom. His entire mentality was in a very strange and complicated state, constantly changing. With my current abilities, if I were to head to the territories of those superpowers, I'm afraid I'll be discovered immediately, and the consequences will be fatal. That's why I need to go to a remote area to properly come into contact with the absolute truth. It would be best if I could obtain enough power to go against the superpowers. Only then can I go to the center of the universe. This Empyrean thought to himself, and finally made a decision. He turned around and thought about the direction in which Luo Fan had come. He tore open the space-time and stepped into it, disappearing without a trace, in the direction where Luo Fan came from. Apart from the mid-tier kingdoms, the Kingdom of Eternity, and other low-tier kingdoms, there were countless other river systems. Although there were habitable planets in each of those galaxies, the level of those countries was getting lower and lower, and they were not far from each other. There would be no country at all. There would only be counties after counties. In such an area, to a celestial god, this was obviously a desolate area, equivalent to the deserts of a habitable planet. Such an area was obviously the best place to hide for the heavenly gods who did not want to be part of the superpowers. A celestial god was the most technologically advanced creation of a high-tier kingdom. Of course, he couldn't just rely on flying to move around. Spatial teleportation was already an instinct for a celestial god who hadn't yet embarked on the path of cultivation. Now that he had embarked on the path of cultivation and passed the immortal ascension tribulation to become an itinerant immortal, he was naturally even more adept at spatial teleportation. With this teleportation, he traversed who knew how many billions of light years and arrived at the edge of the kingdom of God's original territory. It was a desolate area that he never thought he'd come to. The habitable planets here didn't even have a habitable planet that could break through the limits of the planet itself. That was to say, in this star field, the level of scientific and technological civilization of those life-sustaining planets was actually not much better than that of the Earth before Luo Fan transmigrated. This place isn't bad. The celestial god arrived and scanned the area. He was very satisfied. The higher my cultivation, the closer I can get to the absolute truth. Once I reach the legendary Khanate Grand Luo, I'll be able to truly come into contact with the absolute truth and obtain everything I need from it. He flipped through the cultivation information Luo Fan gave him in his mind. His heart was filled with a strong will to fight. For the absolute truth, I won't show mercy to anyone or any faction, even if the entire universe is in my way. With that thought in mind, he stepped into a habitable planet. He turned into a normal person and began to cultivate on this planet. If Luo Fan wanted to know what the celestial god was doing, he could do so with just a thought. However, he had no interest in paying attention to where the celestial god went. At this moment, he was moving towards the center of the universe according to the information he got from the celestial god. At the same time, he was carefully reading through the information he got from the kingdom of God. He was absorbing all sorts of creative ideas to broaden his horizons and increase his knowledge. Although the kingdom of God was a superpower, it was located at the edge of the universe. Even though there were countless river systems outside, it was still the edge of the universe compared to the superpowers and high-level countries. In the direction that Luo Fan was heading, the low-level countries, middle-level countries, and high-level countries were getting more and more concentrated. If an ordinary person wanted to learn all the information on the technological products of the kingdom of God, even if they spent hundreds of millions of years, they still wouldn't be able to learn all of it. However, for Luo Fan, the time was compressed to an unimaginable level. In just a few days, he had already learned and understood all the information in the memory that was originally the size of a planet. In other words, after a few days, Luo Fan had become the most knowledgeable person in the entire kingdom of God. He was in existence with the highest attainments in science and technology. If he were to become an ordinary person, he would definitely become a pivotal existence in any technological civilization. He did not need to rely on anything else, just his knowledge and technology was enough to achieve this. In order to learn all of this, Luo Fan did not increase his speed to the maximum. Therefore, even after he had learned all of the information in the planet, he still did not enter another river system. He did not get close to the closest country to the kingdom of God. As mentioned before, there wouldn't be a high-level nation around a high-level nation immediately. Generally speaking, there would be many mid-level nations, low-level nations, and even unranked nations around high-level nation that occupied a large area of the star field. These were the foundations left for the high-level country to develop into a superpower. When a high-level country was able to become a superpower, it would be able to absorb these middle-level and low-level countries. Then, they would be able to absorb these middle-level and low-level countries and turn them into true superpowers. It was precisely because of this that the first country that Luo Fan came into contact with after leaving the kingdom of God was only an unranked country. Moreover, because of this, the first country that Luo Fan came into contact with after leaving the kingdom of God was only an unranked country. Moreover, not only was this country an unranked country, in the river system where this country was located, the strongest country was only a middle-level country. This kind of country, to Luo Fan, who had completely studied all of the technological creations in the kingdom of God, was not of much help. The technological creations in these countries, almost all of them could be found in the technological creations in the kingdom of God, even the highest technological creations. They were only equivalent to the average technological creations in the kingdom of God, but very few of them were creative enough to light up Luo Fan's eyes. After going through a few countries, Luo Fan finally gave up on the idea of exploring every single one of them. As for those unranked countries and those middle-level countries, most of them would just casually sweep their senses over them. Once there was a technological creation that lit up his eyes, he would stop to understand it a little, and if there was nothing, he would just go around it without stopping at all. This universe was three-dimensional, and the direction that Luo Fan was heading toward the center of the universe was a straight line. If Luo Fan wanted to go through all the star systems and all the countries in the universe, then this line would be too long, so long that it would make people despair. Therefore, when Luo Fan felt that those middle and low-level countries would not be of much help to him and would not increase his knowledge, he shortened this line by a lot. Although it was still full of twists and turns, at least it was not as spiraling as before. However, even if that was the case, the distance was simply too great, and there were simply too many countries. Therefore, Luo Fan's speed was not fast. It could even be said that it was quite slow. Time continued to pass during this process. On this day, Luo Fan suddenly stopped in the void. He casually took out a ball of something from his universe in his sleeve. Then, he raised his hand and shook the thing slightly. The thing instantly disappeared without a trace, and a figure appeared. After this figure appeared, endless flames ignited all over his body. A thundercloud also appeared in the sky at this moment. However, this thundercloud was much weaker than the thundercloud that the heavenly God had encountered previously. The thundercloud that the heavenly God had encountered previously could cover dozens of star systems, but the thundercloud that this figure had encountered could only cover a few acres. It quietly surged and brewed in the void. There is indeed a predestined fate. When Luo Fan saw this, he smiled and raised his hand to point gently. The figure's mind and intent gained some means of using power. Its somewhat dazed eyes instantly became clear. He looked up at the thundercloud above his head with a look of shock and joy. This figure was none other than the flame giant. However, at this moment, the flame giant did not just have intelligence. It could completely turn a real living being into a living being. It was no longer just a manifestation of intelligence, but a living being with a soul and a body. Furthermore, it was a cultivator. When the flame giant came back to its senses, countless lightning bolts struck down from the thundercloud in the sky and quickly enveloped the flame giant. It seemed like it had turned into a person of electricity. A pained expression appeared on the flame giant's face, but it didn't do anything. It didn't use any means to resist, nor did it struggle. It just allowed the lightning to wreak havoc, exposing itself to the lightning's attacks. The thundercloud was a predestined fate formed by the malicious intent of the universe towards cultivators. It targeted everything that did not conceal its aura. It was born for cultivators sensed by the universe. The purpose of its existence was not to test cultivators, but to exterminate them. One could imagine how powerful it was. The lightning bolts instantly rushed into the flame giant's body and destroyed everything in a frenzy. The flames on the surface of its body began to dim. However, even so, the flame giant's eyes became brighter and brighter. The light in the flame giant's eyes grew brighter and brighter. Although he looked like he was enduring pain, he was faintly smiling with difficulty. It was clear that it had gained some benefits from the destruction of the lightning bolts. Quite creative. Luo Fan could not help but exclaim when he saw this. The flame giant was clearly making use of the thunder and lightning to attack its body. It wanted to refine its soul that had just been born, so that its body and soul could gradually strengthen, making it more realistic and powerful. The tribulation clouds above continued to send lightning bolts down. The number of lightning bolts continued to increase. At first, it was like a downpour, but not long after, it became like a waterfall falling from the sky. It was like a waterfall falling from the sky. Just the way it was pouring down brought with it an indescribably terrifying aura, which was shocking to the hearts of those who saw it. Under the increasing power of the tribulation, the flame giant could no longer deal with it as easily as before. With the help of the technique that Luo Fan had imparted to him, he set up a thin but tough layer of golden light on the surface of his body to filter out the lightning bolts that his body could not withstand. He limited the lightning bolts that invaded his body to the limit that he could withstand and continued to refine his body and soul. During this process, although he was in a sorry state and his body was charred black, the flames around his body were almost completely extinguished. However, an increasingly dense, pure, and real aura was gradually being emitted from his body and soul. At the same time, an otherworldly aura gradually appeared on his body. This otherworldly aura was the aura that was produced when one surpassed the mortal realm and stepped into the immortal realm. Although the flame giant was much weaker than the celestial god, its power was still at the level of a demi-saint, which was much stronger than a connate zenith heaven. Under such circumstances, as long as he developed a real soul and learned the real cultivation method, he would naturally be able to surpass the limits of the mortal realm and step into the immortal realm, just like the celestial god, and become an itinerant immortal. As soon as this otherworldly aura appeared on the flame giant, the tribulation clouds above seemed to be stimulated and suddenly expanded by more than 10 times. The lightning bolts that poured down from the tribulation clouds also began to change at this moment. They began to condense into one technological creation after another, or rather, technological weapons that began to attack the flame giant in a frenzy. Compared to the technological creations that the celestial god had encountered, these technological creations were of a much lower level. Even the strongest technological creations were only at the level of the universe obliteration cannon. There were no space-time modification devices or anything like that. The vast majority of technological creations were the most advanced technological creations of those low-level countries. This level of technological weapons. These weapons might not mean much to the celestial god, but they were almost beyond the limits of the flame giant. Under the attack of this terrifying number of technological weapons, the flame giant's body immediately shook, and he let out a shrill cry. Almost half of his body was instantly obliterated. Fortunately, his reaction was fast, and the methods of using power that Luo Fan had taught him were sufficiently exquisite. Therefore, he was still able to open a clear light barrier to cover his body and block all the attacks. Intense flames surged out of his body and began to condense on the half of his body that had been obliterated. It took a while for that half of his body to completely reform. That was close. The flame giant shouted and pushed up with both hands. Countless flames turned into clear light that poured into the light barrier and propped up the light barrier that had almost completely collapsed. After the lightning bolts condensed into various technological weapons, their destructive methods were no longer limited to lightning. Instead, they were ever-changing. The terrifying heat of the universe obliteration cannon was just one of the most common attacks. There were also other attacks that could cut, corrode, distort, and so on. There were all kinds of strange and bizarre attacks that were really hard to defend against. Chapter 1150. The flame giant could no longer maintain his relaxed state in the face of such a violent tribulation. His power was constantly converted into the power of the light barrier to defend against the terrifying attacks of the technological creations. Although the power of these technological creations was much weaker than that of ordinary technological creations, their power was still considerable. It was extremely difficult for the flame giant to defend against them in his current state. Every attack would cause the clear light barrier to tremble. He had to pour out his power in a frenzy to be able to defend against the attacks of the technological creations. This process was truly excruciating. However, given the flame giant's understanding of the cultivation civilization, he could only use this method to forcefully endure the attacks. He could not use various methods to defend against the tribulations like the gods. Fortunately, the flame giant had a lot of energy, far surpassing the limits of an ordinary itinerant immortal. Therefore, although the attacks were painful, he still managed to defend against them. 9 days later, when the last wave of lightning condensed into hundreds of universe obliteration cannons and launched their final attack, the flame giant roared. All the energy in his body surged out frantically and poured into the clear light barrier around him. After receiving such a huge amount of energy, the light barrier expanded rapidly. Countless strange spikes appeared on it, making it look like a hedgehog. It stood upright and faced the light from the countless universe obliteration cannons. The effect of these spikes was rather strange. It directly treated the originally formless and intangible heat energy as a tangible existence. Like a silk thread, it blocked a large amount of the heat energy outside the light shield, reducing the heat energy that hit the light shield to a few 10,000th of its original strength. Although just a few 10,000th of the heat was enough to make the light barrier suffer a tremendous impact and almost collapse, it did not collapse in the end. In the end, it was the flame giant that blocked the last attack. After the last wave of attacks, the thunderclouds above gradually dissipated. Not long after, the scene 9 days ago before the tribulation clouds appeared was restored. Even the space-time that had become chaotic due to the attacks from the tribulation clouds had now returned to normal. It was impossible to tell how many times the space-time in the 9 heavens had collapsed and been reborn. When everything had calmed down, the flame giant prostrated towards Luo Fan. "Thank you, immortal elder, for your grace of rebirth." To the flame giant, Luo Fan's grace of giving him a new lease of life wasn't just empty words. Instead, it was real. Without Luo Fan's help, it would have been impossible for it to possess a soul, let alone become a cultivator. It could only be called a technological creation. Although the intelligence he possessed was miraculous, it was only intelligence after all. It was like a rootless duckweed, and there was a qualitative difference between it and the present. Luo Fan smiled when he saw the flame giant's reaction. "Why do you need to thank me? This was your initial request, and I only imparted it to you because I found it interesting. No matter what, Immortal Elder gave me life. This is a great kindness. I have to repay it. I'm willing to follow you for the rest of my life and serve you to repay your kindness. The flame giant said resolutely. Why do I need you to serve me? Luo Fan shook his head. Since you've already cultivated to become a living being, you don't need to stay by my side anymore. You can leave now. Whatever you want to do in the future, even if it's to be my enemy, do as you please. This caused the flame giant's expression to change drastically. Don't worry, Immortal Elder. Even if I die, I won't be your enemy. I have nowhere to go now. I hope Immortal Elder will take pity on me and take me in. No matter what you want me to do, I'm willing. Luo Fan just shook his head and said, Nowhere to go? Then find a place for yourself to go. I'm already making an exception by imparting you the technique. Why would I care where you go? As he spoke, he couldn't be bothered with the flame giant anymore. He took a step forward, and his figure disappeared from the flame giant's sight. Although the flame giant had already passed the tribulation, coupled with the terrifying energy it possessed, its strength was more than a level higher than before. Based on energy alone, it wasn't much weaker than the universe obliteration cannon. However, how could it compare to Luo Fan? If Luo Fan wanted to avoid being discovered, even if Luo Fan stood right in front of him, the flame giant wouldn't be able to detect him. Now that Luo Fan had turned around and left, he had already gone many light years away in the blink of an eye. How could the flame giant discover him? For a moment, it was as if the flame giant was the only one left in the entire universe. A feeling of loss and helplessness arose in its heart. Immortal Elder, Immortal Elder, the flame giant instinctively began to call out loudly. Unfortunately, its words didn't travel too far. It didn't even hear an echo. How could there be an echo? So, you really found it interesting, so you imparted the technique to me. After shouting for a long time, the flame giant finally knew that there would be no reply. It stopped helplessly, and this thought flashed through its mind. Where should I go now? After knowing that there was no turning back, the flame giant felt an indescribable sense of loss in its heart. Previously, he told Luo Fan that he had nowhere to go. Although some of it was to make Luo Fan accept him as his follower, a large part of it was his true feelings. Although the entire universe was huge, and although there were countless planets with life, and there were endless exciting places to go to, the universe was still vast. However, for the flame giant that had turned into a cultivator, there was no place for it to go. In the entire universe, he and Luo Fan were the only two living beings who walked the path of self-evolution. That kind of loneliness and bewilderment was unimaginable unless one personally came to this place. Return to the Guotuan County that created me? No, if I go back there now, it will only make them suspect how I escaped from the immortal. They will definitely investigate the fact that I am now a cultivator. What happened then? Breaking off all relations with Guotuan County isn't a good choice at all, the flame giant pondered. Follow the path of the immortal? That was even more unacceptable. If Immortal Elder thinks I'm annoying, he casually squeezed me, and I died. After thinking for a while, the flame giant suddenly slapped his head and shouted, Screw it. Since the entire universe only has me and the Immortal Elder, then I will create more cultivators. I will create a cultivation civilization in this universe. That way, I won't be lonely anymore, and I won't have nowhere to go. This flame giant was merely the most advanced technological creation in a small county like Guotuan County. Not to mention the Kingdom of God, which had the highest level of technology. Even the people from the middle-level and low-level countries were far behind. Under such circumstances, he didn't know that the universe itself was rejecting cultivators. He didn't know that the tribulation from before was not a normal cultivator's tribulation, but the universe's strangulation of cultivators. That was why he had such a grand ambition. He wanted to go against the laws of the universe and create a cultivation civilization. No matter what, the flame giant was the most advanced technology in a county. Even if it was not as advanced as the heavenly gods, it was still quite extraordinary. Its ability to act was needless to say. After making his grand ambition, he started to search for planets nearby that could be used to create a cultivation civilization. It took him 3 to 4 years. After traveling through hundreds of galaxies, he finally gave up on the idea of finding life-bearing planets to create a cultivation civilization. Even though this place was still very far from the center of the universe, it was no longer at the edge of the universe like Guotuan County, where he was born. The life-bearing planets here, even if they did not belong to the higher-level countries, they must have had many interactions with the higher-level countries. If he wanted to guide such a life-bearing planet to become a cultivation civilization, that was definitely a mosquito that stopped between two palms. He was really tired of living. Thus, after 3 to 4 years, the flame giant sighed and decided to go as far away from the center of the universe as possible to find life-bearing planets to create a cultivation civilization. Even though Guotuan County was extremely far from here, it was at least hundreds of billions of light years away. Normally, the flame giant would not be able to find a way back from such a great distance. However, he was originally a technological creation, and it was much easier and more convenient for him to integrate into those life-bearing planets than Luo Fan. Therefore, it was very easy for him to find out about the structure of the universe and the location of Guotuan County. He also knew which direction he should go to reach the edge of the universe. Therefore, after making up his mind, he immediately changed his direction. Instead of using the flying method that he obtained after becoming a cultivator, he directly used the flying ability that he obtained when he was a technological creation to head toward the edge of the universe. Compared to the flying method he obtained after becoming a cultivator, using the flying ability created by a technological civilization was much slower. Even if he flew at full speed, it would still take him over 100 years to reach the edge of the universe. It was at least half as slow as using the flying method of cultivator. However, there was an advantage to doing this. Even if some countries detected his existence, they would not think of him as a cultivator. They would only think that he was a technological creation sent by a higher-level country to explore the universe. It was easy to imagine how great the benefits to his safety would be. During the 100 years of flight, the flame giant was detected hundreds of times by the countries along the way. However, as he was heading toward the center of the universe, he was very lucky that none of the countries tried to stop him. He successfully passed through many countries and arrived at the edge of the universe, the star sector that did not have any countries at all. When the flame giant finally arrived, his eyes were filled with tears of joy. He felt as if he was a bird flying in the sky and a fish swimming in the ocean. He directly roared into the sky and only stopped after a long time. The flame giant stood in the air and could not help but mutter, "I'm finally here. I no longer have to worry about being detected by the countries around us, and I no longer have to worry about being captured for experiments. This is great." He raised his head and looked toward the center of the universe, and he made up his mind. "I'll never step into that place again, even if you kill me. I'm a heavenly god. How should I address you, fellow Taoist?" The flame giant's face was filled with determination. Just as he was about to make up his mind, a voice entered his ears. The flame giant was shocked. His body suddenly trembled, and he turned his head to look. He didn't know when, but there was a man in a long robe, with long hair, and an ethereal aura floating in the air 3 feet away from him, looking at him with a smile on his face. The person who just spoke was obviously this person. "You're a cultivator?" The flame giant was dumbfounded. "Of course." The heavenly god chuckled. "I've been a cultivator for more than 100 years, and I've finally met a fellow cultivator. What a pleasant surprise. How should I address you, fellow Taoist?" This person was none other than the heavenly god from the heavenly god's country, the heavenly god that Luo Fan taught him how to cultivate. The flame giant had been flying for 100 years. He flew from the region near the center of the universe all the way to the desolate region of the universe. Before he knew it, he had arrived at the region where the heavenly god lived in seclusion and was discovered by the heavenly god. After 100 years of cultivation, the heavenly god's cultivation was no longer that of an itinerant immortal when he had just passed the terrifying tribulations. He had unknowingly grown to the great innate realm of the great Luo. It was this profound realm that allowed him to discover the existence of the flame giant so easily. It was this profound realm that allowed him to discover the flame giant's existence so easily, as well as the nature of the flame giant. It was also this profound realm that allowed him to directly appear next to the flame giant. If it weren't for his profound realm, the flame giant wouldn't have been able to discover his existence so easily. Even though the flame giant had entered this region, it was still several light years away from the planet with life, where the heavenly god lived in seclusion. How could the flame giant have arrived next to the heavenly god so quickly? The flame giant was tongue-tied by the heavenly god's question. Although he had existed for a long time and had been a true living being for 100 years, he had never had a name. However, he had never had a name. Now that the heavenly god asked him this question, he was momentarily stunned. The heavenly god looked at the flame giant strangely, but he didn't think too much about it. He quietly waited for the flame giant to answer his question. As the second cultivator he had met in this universe, he naturally had a good impression of the flame giant, so he naturally had a lot of patience with the flame giant. What was the big deal about waiting for a little time for the flame giant to think things through? My name is Flaming Flame. Greetings, Taoist friend. The flame giant thought for a while and finally gave himself this name. So, it's Taoist friend, Flaming Flame. Nice to meet you. You and I are both cultivators, and it's really fate that we met this time. Why don't you come with me to my cave abode and have a seat? The heavenly god laughed. The heavenly god was very curious about the flame giant's appearance, and the flame giant was also very curious about the second cultivator he had met. Hearing the heavenly god say this, although he was nervous and hesitant, he couldn't resist his curiosity and agreed. When Flaming Flame agreed, the heavenly god was overjoyed. He apologized and took him with one hand. Under the effect of some kind of traction, he directly traveled through time and space and arrived on a planet with life. This planet with life was not the same as the planet with life that the heavenly god had lived in seclusion 100 years ago. Although the technological level of that planet had not broken through the planet's limits and had not stepped into the level of an interstellar civilization, it had still developed a considerable amount of technology. However, after all, it had developed a considerable amount of technology. There were all kinds of sites, and they were all very modern. On the surface, compared to a planet with an extremely advanced technological civilization, there was only a difference in level. However, the situation on this planet was completely different. Right now, this planet with life was like a primitive planet. The intelligent life on this planet was still in the wild and primitive Stone Age. The level of civilization on the entire planet was even thousands of years lower than that of Earth before Luo Fan had traveled through time and space. How could there be such a primitive planet? After all, Flaming Flame was not very knowledgeable. When she sensed the situation on this planet, she could not help but be surprised. This planet still had a low-level technological civilization that was about to step out of the planet tens of thousands of years ago. However, at the critical moment when they were about to enter a stage of rapid development, they broke out in a war that affected the entire planet, and all the creatures on the planet were completely wiped out. This primitive civilization is just developing again in the past tens of thousands of years, the heavenly god explained with a smile. It's really a pity. They actually had a war at that time and destroyed themselves. If they had been able to cross this threshold and break out of the planet and enter the interstellar era, they would have entered a new level. They would not have to worry about resources for tens of millions of years. What a pity, Flaming Flame sighed. That's right, they were just a little short. The heavenly god laughed. The heavenly god had built a cave abode on this planet with life. This cave abode looked very simple, and there were no traces of technology in it. It was completely man-made. While they were talking, the heavenly god had already stopped outside the cave abode with Flaming Flame. Although this cave abode looked simple, the moment Flaming Flame saw it, she was stunned. Her eyes became empty, and her whole body stood there in a daze, unable to move. This was not because the cave abode built by the heavenly God had the ability to hurt people. Instead, every detail of this cave abode contained an indescribable cultivation principle. These cultivation principles made Flaming Flame involuntarily immerse herself in them. She felt the power in her body become extremely active, and she felt that her soul had never been so close to the supreme source of cultivation. Chapter 11:51. In Yanhua's eyes, the cave abode in front of him was clearly displaying the cultivation principles that he had vaguely sensed in the past to him, without holding back. It directly pushed his cultivation realm to a higher level. After a while, Yanhua came back to his senses. He found that his cultivation realm had increased by one level compared to before. He was only a thin barrier away from the perfected immortal realm. He couldn't help but be surprised and happy. He was surprised that the second cultivator he had met was so powerful. Just this cave abode alone was enough to shock him so much. If this person had the slightest bit of malice towards him, he would definitely be doomed. But what he was happy about was that his cultivation level had improved to such an extent. It should be known that in the past 100 years, although he had been constantly on the road, he had not given up on cultivation. However, his cultivation realm seemed to have been fixed in place. No matter how hard he tried, he could not feel any improvement. At this moment, in just a few breaths, he found that his cultivation realm had increased by more than 10 times. How could he not be happy? Do you think my cave abode is not bad? The heaven god said with a smile. It's not just not bad, it's simply a holy land for cultivation. Yanhua could only exclaim, Haha, I don't deserve to be called a holy land for cultivation. This is just some of the things I have gained from cultivation. You're the second cultivator I have seen in my life. I am really happy that you have gained something, the heaven god said with a smile. I see that you have always said that I am the second cultivator you have seen. I wonder where the first cultivator is now. I won't hide it from you. You are also the second cultivator I have seen in my life. Yanhua looked at the heaven god expectantly and said, he was alone in the universe and could not find anyone of his kind. He could not find anyone who could truly communicate with him. This feeling was unbearable. In the past 100 years, Yanhua had enjoyed enough. Although he had found someone of his kind in front of him, it was only one. Wouldn't it be better if there were more? Huh, great minds think alike. I am also very interested in the cultivators you have seen before. The heaven god was overjoyed. Like Yanhua, the heaven god also looked forward to meeting his own kind. Although he had improved very quickly in the past few years, and he also had such a huge river system in his body, it was impossible for him to control it. With such a large population, but none of them were his own kind. It was just a part of him. His own loneliness and the feeling of being one of the only two cultivators in the universe could not be dispelled because of his situation. It was precisely because of this feeling. That was why he had gone to Yanhua the moment he had discovered him and invited him to his cave abode as a guest. With this mentality, he was also interested in the first cultivator Yanhua had seen. Clearly, the two of them hit it off well. After some communication, the two of them sat there in a daze, looking at each other. If that's the case, maybe we're from the same sect? Yanhua asked blankly. Fellow disciples? We'll have to wait for the immortal to admit that we're his disciples before we can call him that, said the heavenly god helplessly. After the previous exchange, the two of them found out that the first cultivator they saw was actually the same cultivator. The two of them did not know whether to laugh or cry. Their hearts were both a little surprised and a little disappointed. They were pleasantly surprised because their relationship had become closer. However, they were disappointed because there were no other cultivators in the universe other than the ones they had seen. They were still quite lonely. I think we could be considered fellow disciples. The immortal doesn't accept us as disciples, so we're not considered fellow disciples at most. Our roots come from the same place, so it's not wrong to consider us fellow disciples, Yanhua said. The heavenly god nodded. The two of them fell silent for a while. After a while, the heavenly god's eyes suddenly lit up, and he said, I've decided. Let's follow the immortal's route to the center of the universe. Huh. Yanhua almost jumped up. He had previously sworn never to go near the center of the universe, and now the heavenly god was suggesting that they go to the center of the universe. This was directly asking him to go back on his word. How could he not be surprised? No, 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 I'm not going. That's too dangerous. We're cultivators now. If we're discovered by those high-level countries, we'll definitely die without a burial place. It's good to be studied, but it'll be a waste if we're killed directly. Yenhua could not help but shake his head. Discovered by high-level countries? The heavenly god's expression could not help but become a little strange. After thinking about it, he smiled slightly, said sorry for the offense, and raised his hand to cover Yenhua. In an instant, an indescribable force enveloped Yenhua and suddenly pulled him into the inside of his body. He entered the river system inside the heavenly god's body and appeared in an extremely vast starry sky. Yenhua could not help but shake his head. Suddenly, he realized that the fellow disciple in front of him had suddenly said sorry for the offense, and then raised his hand to point at him. He was a little shocked when he arrived, thinking that this person was going to kill him. Suddenly, he found that the world had changed, and he had arrived in a whole new world. He could not help but be stunned for a moment. This is the inside of my body. While he was in a daze, a voice came from beside him. He turned his head and saw that the heavenly god had appeared beside him. However, the heavenly god now looked a little blurry and illusory, as if it was only an illusory body and not a real body. Seeing this, he heaved a sigh of relief. Although he did not know what was going on, at least he could be sure that this fellow disciple did not have any intention of attacking him. After he heaved a sigh of relief, he then noticed the content of the heavenly god's words. What? This is inside your body? How can there be such a universe in your body? He cried out in surprise. To be precise, this is a river system, or rather, a country, the heavenly god said with a smile. High-level countries? Hearing this, Yenhua was even more shocked. After all, he was essentially a product of technological creation. Although his knowledge was far less than that of the highest technological creation of a high-level or medium-sized country, he still had some concept. He had a clear understanding of the concept of a galaxy being a country. How can there be a high-level country in your body? Yenhua said in shock. This country is me. Haven't you heard of my name? The heavenly god said. You are called the heavenly god. Are you that high-level country, the heavenly god country? How? How can a country become a cultivator? Yenhua shouted. The truth is right in front of you. Do you still need me to explain? The heavenly god said calmly. Yenhua looked at the river system in front of her, then at the heavenly god beside her. Finally, she was speechless. After a long time, Yenhua said, Since you are a high-level country, why are you staying at the edge of the universe? With your strength, as long as you don't encounter a super country, you can basically do whatever you want in this universe. I became a cultivator to come into contact with the absolute truth, not to do whatever I want in the universe. If I stay near the center of the universe, I'm afraid I can only run for my life. Every second of every day, he was fighting. How would I have time to study the absolute truth then? The heavenly god said matter-of-factly, How about it? Now, are you willing to go to the center of the universe with me? The heavenly god said, Since you are a high-level country, I can guarantee my safety when I go to the center of the universe with you. However, why? Why do we have to follow the path of the immortal and go to the center of the universe? Yenhua struggled to find a reason. This was indeed his doubt. As a high-level country, the heavenly god only needed to create an aircraft that could only be owned by a high-level country. Naturally, he could disguise himself as a product of a technological civilization and hide the fact that he was a cultivator. There was no need for him to personally go in a battle like he did. However, he did not know why he had to do this. Although it was relatively safe, he was still doing something that seemed useless. Have you forgotten how you and I became cultivators? The heavenly god said, I know. I'm also extremely grateful to the immortal. I dare not forget for even a moment, Yenhua said, a little confused. I mean, do you really think that the two of us are the only two cultivators that the immortal has enlightened? Will the immortal not enlighten more cultivators on the long journey to the center of the universe? The heavenly god felt very helpless with Yanhua's slow response, so he could only explain things clearly. These words made Yanhua's eyes suddenly light up. The flames around his body began to rise, making him a man of fire. One could imagine how excited he was. Go! Leave immediately. Not only do we have to follow the immortals' route, but we also have to go as fast as possible. Yanhua shouted. Seeing this, the heavenly god was finally satisfied. He raised his hand and brought Yanhua with him. In a flash, he had already appeared in the outside world. Then, he raised his hand and inserted it into his chest. He rummaged around inside his body a few times and pulled out a 4-foot-long sword. He then threw it into space outside the planet. After the long sword reached space, it expanded crazily. In the blink of an eye, it reached the level of the moon. Such a huge and heavy long sword appeared in this solar system. It almost affected the solar system's gravitational system. Yanhua looked up at the long sword and knew that it was a very strange-shaped spaceship. His eyes were instantly filled with shock. Is this the technological level of a high-level country? It's so beautiful, he muttered. Even though he was already a cultivator, he was still a product of a technological civilization. As the saying went, it was easier to change a leopard's spots than a leopard's spots. He still had a special feeling for technological products. The moment he saw the universe ship, he immediately used the logic of technology to analyze the universe ship. With this analysis, he was completely immersed in it. He was shocked by the level of technology it contained. He felt that his view of technology had been completely overturned. Is this really the level that a technological civilization can reach? This spaceship is almost like a world inside. It's at least 100 million times more advanced than me. Could it be that the technological civilization of a high-level country can reach this level? Then what about a super country? Yanhua's eyes were filled with shock. Countless complicated thoughts surged in his mind. This spaceship looked like a long sword. This shape was too common in the universe. No one would think that it was a cultivator. And on this long sword, the densely packed lines looked like they were made up of pieces of mechanical parts. Within this long sword, there was a sense of space and time. It was as if there was an infinite space and time compressed inside. This spaceship was formed after I came into contact with the absolute truth. I upgraded the spaceships of the nation of God according to the truth. It's not something that a high-level country's technology can achieve. I even suspect that the super country's technology might not be able to reach this level. Cammy listened to Yanhua's sigh and laughed. The reason he became a cultivator was to come into contact with the absolute truth, which was the Tao. Therefore, after coming into contact with it, he would naturally transform the result of his contact into a technological product, the one in front of him. This was the product that had appeared. Let's go. Cammy saw that Yanhua didn't react at all. He knew that Yanhua didn't listen to his words. He didn't say anything else. He lifted his hand and pulled Yanhua. His body had already crossed a long distance. He directly entered the spaceship. Entering this spaceship, it was indeed a vast world. The entire world even had a relatively complete energy cycle, except that it couldn't generate its own energy. Everything here was not much different from the real universe. Yanhua saw that it was such a wonderful place. He immediately left Cammy behind and began to explore the spaceship. After a full 10 days, he finally returned to where Cammy was. He said to Cammy, "This thing, give me one." "Sure. Whenever you want it, I can give it to you anytime." Cammy laughed. "That's great." At this moment, Yanhua finally felt how lucky he was to have such a fellow sect member. A few years later, in a star field, a spaceship that looked like a long sword was traversing through the universe. Suddenly, a loud roar resounded in the universe. An ape-like beast suddenly appeared in the universe and directly pounced towards the spaceship. Looking at its crazy posture, it seemed like it wanted to perish together with the long sword. At this moment, the spaceship shook slightly. A destructive light shot out from the long sword and pierced through the incomparably large, ape-like beast. After being hit by this light, the entire body shook and instantly split into countless small pieces, becoming countless tiny pieces of flesh that disappeared without a trace. How many is this? Why is it that the closer we get to the center of the universe, the more of these things there are? In the spaceship, a man wrapped in flames said helplessly. Beside this man, a man wearing a Taoist robe said, "It's the 373rd. This is the 373rd beast we've encountered. Its strength ranks around 89th among all the beasts. It's not too high, but not too low either." These two people were obviously Yanhua and Cammy, who were following Luo Fan's route. "Hey, can't you give me some reaction? This isn't what I want," Yanhua said helplessly. "What do you want me to say? You know what I know, and I don't know what you don't know," Cammy said helplessly. "Then can't you make a guess? You have the population of a high-level country in your body. There must be someone who can guess the truth," Yanhua said with disdain. "Their guess? That's too many. I remember there are more than 300 million possibilities. Which one do you want to hear?" Cammy glanced at Yanhua and said, "The most likely one." Yanhua said, at this moment, they were already billions of light years away from where they had started. The spaceship they were piloting had traveled tens of millions of light years. During this process, when the two of them passed through the place where Yanhua had been, they realized that the universe seemed to have changed somehow. This change could not be described with words, and the two of them had no idea what it was. They only knew that after this change, there were many things in the universe that they could not understand, or in other words, things that could not be explained by technology. The giant beast that had pounced at them just now was one of them. Over the years, they had encountered many types of giant beasts, and their numbers were quite large. These giant hands had different strengths, and some of the stronger giant hands even made the two of them feel like they were Luo Fan. They had almost torn their spaceship apart. As for the weaker ones, they were not even as strong as Yanhua. They did not even need to do anything. As long as the spaceship crashed into them, they would be destroyed. Apart from these abnormal regions that were different from the outside universe, as well as the life forms that they encountered that were different from the original normal technological civilization of the universe, the cultivators that Luo Fan had enlightened and their fellow disciples that they had originally wanted to find were nowhere to be found. From the looks of it, it was as if Luo Fan had stopped the process of transforming the universe's intelligence into a cultivator. You've heard that reason more than 10 times. Do you still want to hear it? Cammy said calmly. Is it still the same reason? The current situation is very different from when that possibility first appeared. Could it be that the most likely reason still hasn't changed? Fireworks yelled. It hasn't changed. It's still a superpower that has gone crazy and used the power of the entire country to distort the rules of the universe. This is the most likely reason, Cammy said. How could this happen? The nature of those superpowers has been raised to a level that is compatible with the universe. All of their citizens have great wisdom. How could they have gone crazy? This reason is ridiculous no matter how you look at it. How could it be the most likely reason? Yin said disdainfully. Chapter 1152. Just as Yin Hua was about to say something, suddenly, God Kami raised his hand and said, "Wait, there seems to be something." Hearing this, Yin Hua stopped and carefully observed the image of the spaceship. It was a screen that was suspended in front of him, and it showed the boundless universe outside the spaceship. Where is it? I don't see it. Yin Hua looked carefully for a while and realized that the situation outside was no different from how it had been for a few years. So he said anxiously, "Look over there," God Kami said as he pointed at a spot on the screen. Yin Hua carefully observed the spot he was pointing at. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he said, "There's something wrong there. It's as if there's an invisible thing flying at high speed. Could it be a detection artifact from a great nation?" God Kami shook his head and said, "That's definitely not a detection artifact from a great nation. Although a great nation is powerful, I'm confident that the detection ability of this spaceship is not inferior to that of a great nation's creation. Something that can hide from the spaceship's detection for so long and allow me to only discover it now is definitely not that kind of thing. Could it be a cultivator's creation?" Yin Hua was overjoyed. "Then what are we waiting for? Hurry up and take a look at it." God Kami nodded and raised his hand to do something. His spaceship, which looked like a long sword, suddenly shot out a beam of light toward the strange spot. The beam of light kept changing in midair. When it reached that spot, it turned into a palm. It was an incomparably huge palm that covered the sky and covered the earth. Even the palm lines on it could be seen clearly. It was a clear white palm. As soon as the palm appeared, it suddenly squeezed down on the space in that location. The power of this squeeze was truly earth-shattering. The space and time in that area instantly froze under this pinch, revealing what seemed to be a translucent crystal. This was clearly a squeeze. As a result, a certain function of the space-time modifier was created. It directly transformed that area of space-time into a crystal wall, causing that area of space-time to instantly become extremely stable. It could even withstand the explosion of the universe obliteration cannon. And in this crystal wall, a figure that seemed somewhat illusory, yet also very real appeared. It was a human figure. One of them was less than 3 meters tall and looked like a young woman. It was as if they were just any ordinary human silhouettes that existed on any life planet. However, this figure was currently wrapped in a strange light that was a strange existence. The light itself was an invisible existence. This invisible and intangible existence also made her body invisible and intangible at the same time, thus breaking away from the detection limits of all technological creations. However, in this crystal wall, this kind of radiance clearly manifested some kind of substance. Under this substance, that figure looked like he was wrapped in a transparent jelly, appearing extremely strange. The figure's face was filled with shock, and there seemed to be a deep and unfathomable light flashing in his eyes. There seemed to be many signs of devouring in his eyes. She struggled frantically in the crystal wall. However, this struggle was limited to the jelly. In other words, all of her struggles could only change the internal composition of the jelly. She could not affect the outside of the jelly, nor could she shake the surrounding crystal walls. As the huge palm lifted, the crystal wall was like an ice ball that had been pulled out of the water. It was easily pulled out, and its connection with the surrounding space and time was completely cut off in an instant. Then, the huge palm shrank and brought the crystal wall back into the spaceship. With the crystal wall, it appeared in front of Sky God and Yenhua. The entire process lasted for an extremely short period of time, almost only a split second. At this moment, the echo of Yenhua's last word had not even disappeared. She should be a cultivator. I just don't know if she's from the same sect. Yenhua looked at the female figure in the crystal wall, and her eyes flashed with anticipation and anxiety. Why don't we just ask and find out? Sky God laughed. At this moment, he was also quite happy. After wandering in the universe for so many years and encountering hundreds of difficult battles, he could finally make real progress. How could he not be happy? As he spoke, he casually patted the space in front of him. In an instant, the crystal wall completely collapsed, and the figure disappeared completely. Just like in the beginning, it melted into the void and became undetectable. Obviously, the figure had only appeared because the time and space had turned into the crystal wall, and an inexplicable change had occurred. Now that the crystal wall had disappeared, the invisible and intangible light was activated again. It naturally activated the invisible and intangible power, and it directly hid the figure. Since Sky God dared to destroy the crystal wall, he naturally had a way to deal with it. With a thought, the space inside the spaceship changed naturally. A beam of white light shone out from every corner of the space, illuminating every inch of the void in this space. Under the illumination of this light, the figure of the figure reappeared. This time, it did not even illuminate the invisible and intangible light around the figure. Instead, it directly illuminated the figure of the woman. How could this be? How could the technique that I created be so easily broken? The woman looked at Sky God and Yenhua, who had their eyes locked on her. Her face was full of disbelief as she muttered to herself, "Fellow cultivator, you're also a cultivator, right?" The Empyrean looked at this woman, completely ignoring her muttering, and directly said such a sentence. Ah! The woman's expression changed drastically. She raised her hand and punched at Sky God. At this moment, the Empyrean suddenly felt an unimaginable power coming towards him from the front. The power was secondary. What he cared about was the nature of this power. As soon as this power appeared, it produced an unimaginable suction force that pulled at Sky God and Yanhua wildly. Under this suction force, even the light in the entire space was attracted to this power, causing absolute darkness to form around this power. The outline of a black fist appeared and blasted toward Sky God. This is a black hole. Black hole! The heavenly god was shocked and couldn't help but exclaim. Generally speaking, this kind of suction force that could even absorb light could only appear in a black hole. Although the black hole wasn't much of a threat to ordinary countries, it wasn't much of a threat. Only a true superpower would be able to use a black hole like a household appliance. In this kind of situation, the punch that the person in front of him had unleashed actually contained the characteristics of a black hole. How could Sky God not let his imagination run wild? However, even though he was imagining things, Sky God's reaction was still quite fast. He raised his hand and slapped toward the power. A palm that was 3 meters in size slashed across the void and collided with the power that contained the characteristics of a black hole. The two were instantly annihilated at the same time, creating a strong shock wave that scattered in all directions, causing the entire space to be in chaos. "Stop! We're cultivators too," Yanhua hurriedly shouted from the side. The punch that this person had unleashed just now was aimed at Sky God, not at him. This gave him time to react, and at this moment, he opened his mouth and said the most crucial sentence. At this moment, the woman was about to unleash a second punch. She had even prepared her posture and was just short of directly blasting it out. When she suddenly heard this sentence, her eyes lit up. She maintained her posture and did not move, a hesitant expression appearing on her face. At this moment, Sky God also knew the crux of the problem and could not help but sigh. From this, he could already tell how much psychological pressure this person in front of him had endured and how difficult it had been all these years. After sighing, he slowly released his restrained aura. In an instant, the entire space was enveloped by a kind of perfect, free, and carefree aura. One could faintly hear the faint sound of thunder coming from the void. This perfect, free, and carefree aura was the aura that a Khanate Grand Luo cultivator possessed. And the faint sound of thunder coming from the void was a manifestation of this universe's rejection and suppression of this Khanate Grand Luo aura. If this was in other universes, there would never be such a sound. In some special universes, there might even be celestial sounds and the appearance of heavenly flowers and golden lotuses. This situation finally allowed the woman to completely confirm that these two people in front of her were really cultivators like her. For a moment, the rims of her eyes were slightly red, and they seemed to be faintly moist. Her body relaxed, and she bowed to the two of them. She said, "Shirkong greets the two of you. I've offended you just now. Please forgive me." Hearing this, the Sky God and Yanhua heaved a sigh of relief. If they could not reason it out, it would be a bit troublesome. Now that they had made things clear, things would be easier to handle. The Sky God slowly withdrew his aura and said with a smile, "We also went through this stage, and we understand your mentality. Why would we blame you? I'm Sky God, greet you. I'm Yanhua, greet you." Yanhua also returned the greeting. After the misunderstanding was cleared, the three of them sat down. After sitting down, Shirkong said, "I thought there were only 2 cultivators in this universe. It's really a pleasant surprise to be able to meet the 2 of you today." Hearing this, the Sky God and Yanhua could not help but feel helpless and happy. This was because these words were very familiar to them. The 2 of them had almost said the same thing. Shirkong could not help but be surprised when she saw the strange expressions on their faces. She did not think there was anything wrong with what they said. It cannot be that the 2 of them thought that she was ignorant and embarrassed, right? Thinking of this, she could not help but feel a little nervous. However, after all, she was not an ordinary person. Although she was worried, she still asked, "Fellow cultivators, why are you acting like this? We're being rude. The reason why we are acting like this is because the two of us have said the same thing when we first met. The sky god sighed. Oh, this finally made Shere Kong curious, and she quickly asked for the reason. After the sky god and Yanhua told her the reason, Shere Kong's mouth opened wide. Her face could not help but show the same expression as the sky god and Yanhua before. May I know who the cultivator that you saw before was? The sky god looked at Shere Kong's expression and was almost certain that she was also enlightened by the immortal that had enlightened him. I think that great immortal should be the immortal that fellow Taoist sky god and the immortal that fellow Taoist Yanhua spoke of. Shere Kong sighed. The sky god and Yanhua could not help but look at each other helplessly and happily. After a while, Yanhua finally sighed. I didn't expect us to be from the same sect. May I know how fellow Taoist Shere Kong was enlightened by the immortal? My original body was the guardian of a river system branch of the superpower Eternal Kingdom. It was a technological creation that Eternal Kingdom transformed from a black hole. Nearly 100 years ago, when I was sleeping in the center of the river system branch, suddenly, Shere Kong naturally did not hold back the entire process of being enlightened. Shere Kong's essence was a black hole. It was just that this black hole had been captured by Eternal Kingdom countless years ago and transformed into a biological weapon. It became an individual similar to the Sky God and was sent to guard a river system branch of Eternal Kingdom. The territory of Eternal Kingdom itself encompassed tens of thousands of river systems. Every single one of them. It was a river system branch. Its power was even greater than that of a superpower. At least, the province that Shere Kong was guarding was stronger than the Kingdom of God. Moreover, it was not the kind of power that was 1 or 2 times stronger, but the kind that was 10 times or even 100 times stronger. As the guardian of such a galaxy, Shere Kong would usually sleep in the center of the province, absorbing the power of the universe bit by bit like a black hole. It maintained the gravitational system of the entire galaxy from collapsing and stabilized the entire galaxy's gravitational system for a long time. One day, more than 100 years ago, when Shere Kong was sleeping in the center of the galaxy, she suddenly felt a very strange fluctuation in the gravitational system of the galaxy she was guarding. It was different from the gravitational waves that were produced when the residents of the subprovince carried out technological experiments or created star fortresses or planetary fortresses over the past hundreds of millions of years. Instead, it was a wave that was stronger and more terrifying than anything she had ever encountered. The gravitational force was so strong. She even felt as if another galaxy had directly collided with the province of her galaxy. Shere Kong turned pale with fright when she felt the gravitational wave. She used the detection ability given to her by Eternal Kingdom to scan the entire galaxy and locate the center of the gravitational wave. It was also there that she found a person. One looked very ordinary on the surface. With a casual slap, he destroyed the entire galaxy and condensed it into a small gravitational force. The gravitational force of the entire galaxy was caused by this man's actions. In order to condense the entire galaxy into a small mass of gravitational matter, the power that would erupt would be greater than that of the entire galaxy. The gravitational force was produced by the explosion of such a terrifying power. The instant Shere Kong discovered the man also discovered her. When the man turned his head to look in her direction, Shere Kong felt like she had become naked. All of her secrets, including everything she had experienced when she was an ordinary black hole, were instantly seen by this man. Due to her accumulated wisdom over a long period of time, she felt an indescribable fear. It produced a shocking destructive desire. Under this destructive desire, she attacked the man without hesitation. In order to destroy this man, she directly exploded dozens of stars and used the power of these stars to destroy the space-time within several light years of the man's location. She completely destroyed all matter and even the deep layer of laws of the universe that technology could detect. Even the most advanced technological products of Eternal Kingdom wouldn't dare to withstand such an attack. Even if they weren't destroyed, they would be severely damaged and might even lose their functions. However, after the destruction completely calmed down a few days later, Shere Kong discovered that there was a man with an indifferent expression floating in the region that had turned into nothingness. Even the deep layers of the universe's laws had become chaotic. This man looked exactly the same as he did a few days ago before the explosion. There was no difference at all. Even his clothes were not damaged at all. Even the creases at the corners of his clothes seemed to be exactly the same as before. Even the most advanced technological products of Eternal Kingdom were severely damaged, but the man couldn't even move his clothes. Seeing this scene, the fear in Shere Kong's heart had already reached its peak. Just as she was about to run away, before she could finish her thoughts, and before she could even take any action, she discovered that the man was already standing in front of her. In the blink of an eye, he traversed tens of thousands of light years from the edge of the river system to the center of the river system. He stood calmly in front of her. This kind of attack is very interesting. With the means of a technological civilization, it can completely destroy the rules and laws. It even stirred up the void. If I didn't have stronger means, it might have hurt me. After the man appeared in front of her, he said calmly, This is indeed the tone of an immortal elder." Yenhua's face twitched as she recalled all the things that had happened when she first met Luo Fan. She then interrupted helplessly. "To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Kneeling for sharing fastest update least mistakes. Chapter 1153. And then, I remember that the immortals wouldn't teach you cultivation methods so easily. I begged for a long time before the immortals reluctantly taught me the method and gave me the opportunity to come into contact with the absolute truth, Cammy said from the side. Shere Kong's eyes were a little dazed. After a while, he said, "After the great immortal said that, he took me apart and turned me into countless tiny pieces. After studying them for a few days, he left me to fend for myself. He didn't even want to reassemble them and planned to leave. At that time, I had the last radiance of a setting sun and called for help." At this point, Shere Kong's face was a little red. When they heard Shere Kong say that he called for help, Cammy and Yenhua looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. "You were just a technological creation back then, right? How could you call for help?" Cammy asked. "Yes, as a technological creation, you can't have a sense of self. Even if you have intelligence, it's intelligence without fear. You won't have the fear of death that normal creatures have. So how could you call for help?" Yenhua was also very surprised. "I don't know either. It's just that at that time, I felt an indescribable fear, so I naturally called out that sentence," Shere Kong said. "Then, the immortal elders saved you?" Yenhua didn't understand and could only continue to ask. At that time, the immortal elder glanced at me indifferently and said that it was very interesting to be able to derive a little spirituality from a mortal body. Then he casually squeezed me, and I returned from my original fragmented state to a normal state. However, at that time, my connection with the river system subprovince had been completely cut off, and it felt like I was completely independent. Shere Kong told Cammy and Yenhua what happened after that. Behind them, the extremely terrifying man clicked his tongue in admiration and said that it was interesting. However, that was all. After saying that it was interesting, he leisurely walked away. At this time, Shere Kong's heart was blessed. He suddenly knelt down in front of the man and shouted thank you for saving his life. He also begged the man to help him escape the control of a superpower and obtain true freedom. After such a request was made, Cammy and Yenhua were surprised. This was not something that a technological creation would say. After saying this, the man seemed to be surprised again. Then he said calmly, "Freedom? This thing is very precious to some people. Not worth a dime to some people. You want freedom. What do you think you have in exchange for that freedom?" Shere Kong heard this. As if he had been struck by lightning, he stood there in a daze. Right now, even her own body was casually molded by that man. What else could she have in exchange for freedom? "I don't have anything to exchange." Helpless, she could only say this. "Since you don't have anything to exchange, why should I give you freedom?" The man said. "I can give you everything you want except freedom." Shere Khan could only say this. Including life? That person said indifferently. Shere Khan fell into despair for a moment. Freedom and life, these two existences were interdependent. There was no life. Where would freedom come from? Without freedom, what was the meaning of life? Looking at Shere Hao's despairing expression, the man laughed and said, "Not bad. Your spirituality is stronger than I imagined. Since you brought me so much joy, I'll give you your freedom." As he said this, he casually pointed his finger, and Shere Khan found that there were now some mysterious characters in his mind. As these words circulated, Shere Khan felt a strange change in her body. The power of the black hole began to change, and her spirituality began to grow rapidly. Her cultivation realm also began to gradually increase. After a while, she had advanced from her original state of no cultivation to the itinerant immortal realm, which also triggered the tribulations of the universe. This caused the entire river system to suffer unimaginable damage. Although it did not completely collapse and disappear, it became messy and could no longer maintain its original state as it flew in all directions. This change lasted for 9 days and 9 nights. It was also because of these 9 days and 9 nights. Eternal Kingdom found out about her abnormality. During the tribulations, many powerful technological products were sent to attack Shere Khan, who had obviously become a cultivator and was undergoing the universe's heavenly tribulation. Those technological products were at least at Shere Khan's level. As they were endless, they caused great pressure on Shere Khan. Shere Khan was almost completely destroyed by the tribulations, and she was almost consigned to eternal damnation. Not only did she not obtain her freedom, but she also died. At that moment, the man who taught Shere Khan the cultivation method attacked. With a wave of his hand, it was as though a world had enveloped the cosmic void within a radius of tens of thousands of light years. The technological products were completely trapped in that world, and the connection between them and Eternal Kingdom was completely cut off. Thus, they stopped attacking Shere Khan, allowing Shere Khan to survive the tribulation without any mishap. Shere Khan had become a true cultivator and obtained the chance to be free. The kami stood up and said solemnly, "You said that many of the technological products of Eternal Kingdom that attacked you were taken away by the immortals?" "Yes." Shere Khan seemed to know what the kami was talking about. She sighed and nodded. "Then, Eternal Kingdom should have suffered some losses after losing those technological products, right?" The kami asked. "How could it not have suffered any losses? Eternal Kingdom has tens of thousands of river system provinces. There are hundreds of thousands of technological products of the same level as me. Although they are not the highest technological products of Eternal Kingdom, they are still the backbone of the kingdom. When these technological products were taken away by the great immortals, Eternal Kingdom society experienced a huge upheaval. The entire kingdom has undergone many changes," Shere Khan said. "These changes, what are they?" The kami asked. "Those changes are the highest technological products of Eternal Kingdom. Eternal Kingdom's nature changed because of the fear of the people," Shere Khan said. "Eternal Kingdom? Is Eternal Kingdom not a country's name, but a technological product?" Fireworks was shocked. "That's not strange. I am the highest technological product of the Kingdom of God, so it is not strange for Eternal Kingdom's highest technological products to have this name. However, what I don't understand is the use of Eternal Kingdom itself. What changes happened to its nature?" The kami first explained, then raised another question. Eternal Kingdom's function is like its name. It is an eternal existence, a space that fuses with the universe, or rather, a world. This world can transfer the life imprints of all the dead into the kingdom and reconstruct their bodies. Fusing with the kingdom, they can enjoy the endless life of the universe. The changes that happened to it. It appeared during the process of reconstructing the body of the life imprints, Shere Khan said, looking guilty. "Did it create a lot of monsters in the process?" The kami sighed. "How do you know?" "Oh yes, you must have encountered such monsters before." Shere Khan was shocked at first, then he suddenly realized. "So that's how it is." Fireworks opened her mouth, but no words came out. The kami had told him that the monsters appeared because a superpower had gone mad and used the power of the entire nation to distort the laws of the universe. Now that he had explained it clearly, although it was slightly different from the kami's explanation, it seemed to be the case. It was hard for him to accept it. How is that possible? Then why did the panic of the citizens of Eternal Kingdom cause that world to create monsters? I don't think it's possible. Fireworks tried to find a reason to convince himself. Why is it not possible? A superpower is many times more powerful than any advanced nation. It is even fused with the universe, and its laws can become the fundamental laws of the universe. However, the citizens of this nation are just ordinary people. Perhaps because of the power of Eternal Kingdom, they are very different from the ordinary citizens of the advanced nations, but their essence will not change. Since they are only ordinary people, they will naturally be afraid. Naturally, they will panic. You may not be able to imagine how shocking the great deity's actions were, but I saw it with my own eyes. The hundreds of thousands of technological products that could destroy the entire galaxy were taken away by a sleeve. Even I felt a sense of despair, not to mention those ordinary people. When Shirkong said this, he could not help but shiver. He seemed to recall that shocking scene. As a superpower, Eternal Kingdom took the major event that happened in its territory lightly. The horror of the cultivation civilization was magnified to the extreme in their eyes. Therefore, their mentality. Naturally, they lost their balance. I dare not say that all of them, but at least most of them were dissatisfied with the small amount of power that they controlled. This accumulation of dissatisfaction affected the most advanced technological product, Eternal Kingdom. When Eternal Kingdom bestowed the bodies with life imprints, it absorbed energy from the outside world to create powerful bodies. All of the citizens of Eternal Kingdom had amazing power. It's a pity. Shirkong shook his head and sighed. It's a pity that power is not easy to control. The more powerful the power that exceeds one's control, the more severe the consequences. The Celestial sighed. This was common knowledge in the cultivation civilization, but in the technological civilization, very few people knew about it. That's right. The bodies created by Eternal Kingdom were unable to control the power. They were devoured by the power and turned into monsters. They broke free from Eternal Kingdom and wreaked havoc in Eternal Kingdom, causing more and more deaths. The deaths caused the most advanced technological product, Eternal Kingdom, to have more life imprints and create more monsters. This formed an endless cycle, causing more and more monsters. Finally, the order of Eternal Kingdom collapsed, and it became a monster kingdom. Shirkong sighed. A monster kingdom? That's an exaggeration. Fireworks said as though she was comforting herself. It's not an exaggeration. Don't think that just because you haven't encountered many monsters, it's nothing. In fact, this is not Eternal Kingdom. It's millions of stellar systems away from Eternal Kingdom. The monsters here are scattered, unable, or unwilling to live in Eternal Kingdom. You'll be able to see the true horror when you enter Eternal Kingdom, Shirkong said in horror. So that's how it is. Both Flame and God of Heaven took a deep breath. The interior of the spaceship instantly fell into a state of silence. After a long time, Fireworks asked, "Since it has become like this, is there a need for us to continue forward?" The celestial god stood there, his expression changing for a long time. Then, he gritted his teeth and said, "Forward. Of course we have to advance. I want to see what Eternal Kingdom has become. I want to know more. I want to know if the celestial god has enlightened more cultivators to become our fellow cultivators. You still want to move forward?" Shirkong shouted in surprise when he heard the conversation between the two of them. Of course, the three of us, together with the celestial god, are all the cultivators in the universe. That way, you won't feel lonely. Don't you want to meet more fellow cultivators? The cultivators are weak in this universe, and they are rejected by the entire universe. If we split up, won't we give others a chance to attack us one by one? The outcome will be tragic. The celestial god said firmly. When Shirkong heard this, he thought of his experiences over the past few days and the terrifying heavenly tribulation he had encountered. He could not help but tremble. He knew that what the celestial god said was true. If he did not do anything, he might be able to live a carefree life for a short period of time. However, in the end, he would definitely die under the rejection of the entire universe. What you said makes sense. However, you don't know how dangerous it is. In this state, it's impossible to get close to eternal kingdom, let alone go through it. We will definitely be torn to pieces by those monsters. Shirkong shook his head fiercely. Haha, since we know the situation in front of us, why would we disguise ourselves as the products of technological civilization? We can disguise ourselves as those monsters. Heavenly God listened. The celestial god could not help but laugh. Disguise ourselves as monsters? Hearing the celestial god's words, both Yin Hua and Shirkong's eyes lit up. They had been blinded by their previous beliefs. When they thought about moving forward, they thought that they would definitely be attacked by those monsters. They did not think that they could disguise themselves. After being reminded by the celestial god, they reacted one by one. Countless inspirations flashed in their minds. If we disguise ourselves as monsters, it might be dangerous. Now, many nations are encircling the monsters in Eternal Kingdom. If we disguise ourselves as monsters, I'm afraid we will be killed as monsters. I think it's better to add a transformation ability to disguise ourselves. When we encounter monsters, we can disguise ourselves as monsters. When we encounter the killing teams of other nations, we can disguise ourselves as technological products. That way, we will be foolproof, Shirkong said, his eyes almost shining. There are teams of other nations killing monsters in Eternal Kingdom. Won't those monsters be killed very quickly? Celestial God said, in surprise. How could it be so easy? Speaking of this, Shirkong felt helpless and said, although there are no lack of superpowers in those nations, there is an endless stream of killing power. However, the technological creation of Eternal Kingdom was constantly working. Once a monster died, it would absorb the life imprint and reconstruct a new body. In a short while, a new monster would be created, whether it was the same or a different one. It's simply endless, and it can't be killed. No matter how the killing teams of those nations kill, it doesn't affect the overall number of monsters, Shirkong sighed. Then why not just destroy that technological product Eternal Kingdom? Yenhua said, that's even more impossible. The technological product Eternal Kingdom was originally the most advanced technological product of a superpower. Its defense is not something that can be broken by ordinary forces. In addition, although most of those monsters are muddle-headed and don't have much intelligence, there are some that are fully intelligent. They are constantly guarding the technological product Eternal Kingdom, preventing any damage to it. To destroy that product, even if a few superpowers unite, it is almost impossible. Shirkong was very familiar with the current situation of Eternal Kingdom, so he sighed and explained. I see. Then it's decided. We will first create a spaceship that can freely change between a monster and a technological product spaceship. Then, we will set off through Eternal Kingdom and follow the path of the immortal to find our fellow cultivators. Celestial God said. Okay, Yenhua replied loudly. Although Shirkong did not directly say that he wanted to join, he agreed at this time. In fact, there was no doubt that Shirkong would join Yenhua and Celestial God. Based on Shirkong's way of surviving between Celestial God and Yenhua, surviving alone was a fate worse than death. The loneliness, the uneasiness, and the sense of crisis were all unbearable for her. In comparison, although joining Empyrean in Flame would mean taking risks that she was unwilling to take for the time being, it was much safer than being alone before, which made her feel much better. It also allowed her to enjoy the beauty of freedom. Since they had reached a consensus, there was nothing else to say. Chapter 1154. At that moment, Luo Fan did not know that behind him, the heavenly gods and the others were following his footprints as they headed towards the center of the universe. Over the past 100 years, his speed wasn't slow, but it wasn't fast either as he flew toward the center of the universe. Along the way, he had passed through dozens of superpowers and hundreds of thousands of advanced countries. During this process, he gained an increasingly deeper understanding of the similarities and differences between scientific and technological civilizations and cultivation civilizations. Among them, there were many creative ideas that amazed him. The higher the technological civilization developed, the more mysterious it became. At the level of advanced civilizations, the development direction of technological civilizations was still traceable to Luo Fan. At least, he could understand these civilizations based on his knowledge of technological civilizations. However, when a scientific and technological civilization developed to the level of a superpower, the development of the situation would undergo a tremendous change. It went from being traceable to being traceable to being traceless. Although the fundamental principle used was still the principle of science and technology, there were countless unimaginably complex changes, and it was completely not something that a technological civilization should have. For example, more than 100 years ago, when he encountered the first superpower, Eternal Kingdom, he encountered a technological creation that was modified from a black hole in one of the galaxies. The technological creation looked like a human and called itself emptiness. It was quite powerful. Although it was not as powerful as the heavenly gods that he had enlightened, it had a special ability developed from the characteristics of a black hole. It could control all gravitational systems and even borrow the power of the gravitational system. It could explode with power that could destroy time, space, and the law of destruction. It could even stir and shake the void layer below the law layer. At that time, when he first encountered that attack, if he had not been vigilant at all times and protected himself with the three-dimensional talisman that was set up with the help of the gray, blurry existence, he might have been crushed by that attack. He had been knocked into the unseen world. Apart from that, the life created by the black hole could even have unimaginable spirituality. It knew how to beg for mercy, understand fear, and know how to pursue freedom. This was not something that could be achieved by ordinary technological creations. It was already close to the means of the cultivation civilization. It was precisely because he was curious about this. So, he conveniently enlightened the technological creation at that time. He gave the technological creation the ability to gain freedom. However, because of this enlightenment, it resulted in rather serious consequences. After that, all the technological creatures of Eternal Kingdom that were on the same level as Shirkong used various methods to attack him. He had no choice but to activate his divine ability. He didn't dare to be careless and wait for them to attack him. He could only cut them off from the controlling force behind them and put them into his heaven and earth in his sleeve. His unimaginable actions caused a huge change in Eternal Kingdom. Under the stimulation of his power, the most advanced technology in Eternal Kingdom changed and created countless monsters. Eternal Kingdom became a land of monsters, and the universe changed subtly. Besides Eternal Kingdom, the other superpowers that Luo Fan encountered were different from Eternal Kingdom, but they had their own unique characteristics. If Luo Fan didn't know that their foundation was a technological civilization, he might have thought that the foundation of their civilization was the cultivation civilization at first glance. For example, one of the superpowers that left a deep impression on Luo Fan, its civilization was developed in the direction of runes. The technological products that this superpower wanted were all based on runes. At first glance, these runes looked exactly the same as the 4 runes of the cultivation civilization. However, if one looked closely, they would find that the runes themselves were still the products of the technological civilization. It was just that this country used the means of technology to construct the runes and use the energy of the universe to create all kinds of incredible products. Luo Fan still remembered that among the hundreds of thousands of river systems controlled by that superpower, every river system was condensed into one by countless runes. Almost the power of the entire river system was combined into a self-contained system similar to a large formation that could defend against all kinds of extraordinary attacks. Within the system, everyone could use various methods to mobilize the energy of this system and achieve all kinds of power that only cultivators could have. Among them, Luo Fan even sensed the existence of some creatures whose power was comparable to the peak of Sage to Be or Tao Venerables. Moreover, there were quite a lot of them. Almost every river system had such creatures. It should be known that the territory of this superpower was as many as hundreds of thousands of river systems. In this way, there was a creature whose power was comparable to that of a Tao Venerables in each river system. In total, there were hundreds of thousands of such creatures. This power, even if it wanted to overturn and destroy the entire universe, it would be a simple matter. Not to mention that in this superpower, there were also existences that were superior to these creatures. The power of hundreds of thousands of river systems gathered in the center of this country. In the central void surrounded by all the river systems, a world of technological runes was formed. This world could really be called a paradise on Earth. Almost everything one wanted could be obtained, and anything one wanted could be done. All the power of this superpower was the sum of the power of hundreds of thousands of river systems. Its level of power had almost reached the level of 9 steps below that of a sage. With such power, if it wanted to, it could collapse half of the entire universe with one hand. In the face of such a superpower, Luo Fan was extremely surprised at that time. He stayed there for more than 10 years. He traveled through all the river systems, comprehending the special features of each river system. He observed the characteristics of the river systems themselves and constantly turned the creativity revealed in them into his own. During those 10 years, he also met dozens of creatures who controlled power in the river systems that were relatively interesting. He appeared and communicated with them. Among them, there were also some who were actually interested in the cultivation civilization and asked him to teach them. Because of this, Luo Fan was able to summon 3 cultivators just by standing there. After being enlightened by him, the 3 cultivators had different reactions. One of them directly took the entire river system and turned it into his own body. Then, he ran away. One completely abandoned everything in the river system. He only took the power he needed and left alone. The last one directly ran to the capital of this superpower and surrendered to the highest level of the country. As for the first 2, naturally, Luo Fan did not care about them. As for the third one, Luo Fan casually chased after him. When he entered the technological rune world, he casually dismantled and reorganized the technological rune world. He directly put it away. Then he casually squeezed it. Just like that, the creature that surrendered turned into nothingness. Now, this world of runes was still lying in Luo Fan's sleeve universe. It had become something that he had collected. It was one of the hundreds of thousands of technological products. It was one of the more interesting ones. In addition to these few cultivators that he enlightened, Luo Fan had also enlightened more than 20 technological products or living creatures in the past 100 years. Generally speaking, those that he enlightened were existences that controlled great power. If that was not the case, Luo Fan would not have bothered to pay attention to them. Naturally, he would not have had any interaction with them and would not have been able to enlighten them. The behavior of these cultivators who were enlightened by Luo Fan was different, but most of them decided to stay away from the center of the universe. They wanted to go to the edge of the universe to hide, so as to avoid being killed by the other superpowers. Only a small portion had been brainwashed, or were foolish, or had planned to bring along the cultivation civilization's knowledge in order to do their best for their country, or had triumphantly become the ruler of their country. All of these had died miserable deaths that were unspeakable. Those who triumphantly wanted to become the ruler of their country were fine. They were only destroyed by the power of their country. Those who planned to serve their country were miserable. Not only were they used as test subjects and suffered unspeakable torture, but they were also eventually killed after all their remaining value was squeezed out. Generally speaking, Luo Fan did not care about these cultivators that had been enlightened by him. Only those who went to serve the country and betrayed him would he casually destroy them. On this day, Luo Fan came to a place. In Luo Fan's perception, the demonic aura here was a little stronger than in other places. However, it was still within the normal range. If there were no other reference points, Luo Fan would never have thought that this place was close to the source of the demonic aura. However, with the densely packed superpowers and the unimaginably dense distribution of life planets in those superpowers, he could tell at a glance that this place was already close to the source of the demonic aura. And this place was actually the center of the universe. In front of Luo Fan, there was a superpower that made Luo Fan inexplicably shocked. The number of galaxies owned by this superpower had reached an astonishing 300 million. 300 million galaxies. There are actually so many. Luo Fan looked at the huge country formed by 300 million galaxies in front of him and thought to himself. The information he had obtained in Guotuan County showed that the superpowers of this universe generally did not have too many galaxies. They believed that as long as there were a few galaxies, they would be able to completely support the existence of the superpower. If this could not be supported, no matter how many galaxies there were, it would be useless. However, along the way, he just realized that such a statement was simply nonsense. Of the superpowers he had encountered along the way, except for 1 or 2 countries that seemed to have just broken through the limits of a high-level country to become a superpower, almost all the superpowers had territories that could be counted in the tens of thousands of galaxies. He had even met a few superpowers that were made up of millions of galaxies. However, these superpowers were nothing compared to a superpower formed by 300 million galaxies in front of him. The reason why Luo Fan knew that the 300 million galaxies in front of him belonged to a superpower was not because he had inquired about it, but because he had seen it for himself. In front of him was an incomparably huge spherical cover, covering an area that was unknown how many billions of light years wide, isolating the interior of the spherical star field from the outside world. The interior of the spherical star field was independent, and it was separated from the entire universe outside. I remember that the name of this country seems to be called the Supreme Divine Land. It really lives up to its name. Luo Fan came back to his senses after a while and sighed. This superpower was very famous in this universe. He was very famous in the universe, at least among the high-level countries and superpowers. This country occupied the most power in the Universe Alliance, but it was not the kind of absolute power that was domineering. Instead, it was just a little stronger than the power of any other country. It was precisely because of this that this country was not famous to those mid-level or even low-level countries. However, only those superpowers knew how powerful the Supreme Divine Land was. For any superpower, as long as the Supreme Divine Land sent out the power of any province in any galaxy, it would be enough to destroy the entire universe. Apart from the Supreme Divine Land itself, all the other superpowers, even if the superpower itself might have millions of galaxies, it would still not be able to resist the power of any province in any galaxy of the Supreme Divine Land. Before seeing such a description, Luo Fan felt that it was a little exaggerated and thought that these countries were exaggerating. However, at this moment, when he saw this spherical cover that covered an unknown number of billions of light years, he knew. The description of these superpowers was not exaggerated at all. Or perhaps it was an exaggeration, but it was an exaggeration from another aspect. The kind of exaggeration that exaggerated their own power. The surface of this spherical cover was densely covered with countless strange lines that seemed like special runes. These lines, they looked like technological runes, but they were more complicated than any technological runes, and their effects seemed to be even more mysterious. Although this already seemed very impressive, this was still not the source of Luo Fan's judgment of the Supreme Divine Land's power. What made Luo Fan feel that the Supreme Divine Land's power was even greater than what he had heard was none other than the material of this cover. What formed this cover that covered an unknown number of billions of light years was a crystal wall that had been modified by time and space. The kind of crystal wall that could even be destroyed by an Aeon obliteration cannon's explosion. Of course, this was a crystal wall overall, but in terms of details, it was different from the crystal wall that had been modified by the space-time modification instrument. In front of him, there was not only one kind of crystal wall that formed this cover, but there were so many of them that Luo Fan could not tell how many kinds of crystal walls there were without carefully distinguishing them. These crystal walls were not simply piled up to form such a gigantic cover. Instead, they were like ordinary materials that were made into many parts. Finally, they were piled up and built up, finally forming this unimaginably gigantic cover before them. These parts were all extremely small. Even the strange patterns on the cover that looked like technological runes were formed by these parts. Because it was made up of these components, all the patterns could be moved. During the time that Luo Fan was observing, the entire huge pattern system had already moved hundreds of meters like flowing water, transforming space-time into a crystal wall, and then using the crystal wall as a material to make various technological creations. Such a technology was not comparable to that of other superpowers. Among the superpowers that Luo Fan had seen before, they generally stopped at the level of technological runes. Obviously, this supreme divine land had gone a step further. Of course, its strength was not comparable to that of ordinary superpowers. Luo Fan let out a sigh. After carefully distinguishing it, he found an entrance and exit on top of this huge crystal wall cover. It was unknown how many galaxies, creatures, and forces there were inside the cover that covered an area of billions of light years. One could guess that it was an extremely terrifying number without thinking carefully. Under such circumstances, there would definitely be living beings and forces entering and leaving the barrier at any time. Under such circumstances, it was of course a simple matter to find the entrance and exit of this cover, especially for Luo Fan, who was about to break through to the profound Tao Master. It was even more so. With a light step, Luo Fan came to a certain position on this cover. There was an opening as big as the moon in the crystal wall. The crystal wall components around the opening seemed to have come to life. They squirmed and squeezed against each other, as if they were ready to merge together at any moment to block the hole in the crystal wall. Behind this opening, there was a huge crystal wall platform, on which many strange spaceships were parked. Most of these spaceships were made of various crystal walls. Only some of them were made of some advanced materials. After careful observation, they looked like they were made of rules. Just like ceramics, they were usually as white as jade, but it wasn't difficult to create all kinds of colors. Generally speaking, although the crystal wall existed like a transparent crystal stone, it was the most common crystal wall. After the technological transformation of the supreme divine land, the crystal wall was no longer limited to colorless and transparent colors, but a variety of colors. Some were like metal, some were like wood, some were like leather, and some were even like plastic. It was extremely rich and colorful. The material of the spaceships made of such a crystal wall was not much different from that of the spaceships made of ordinary materials. If it were not for Luo Fan's extraordinary eyesight, which allowed him to see through the essence at a glance, he might not have recognized that these spaceships were made of crystal wall materials. Chapter 1155. Each of these spaceships was about the size of a car. Even the bigger ones were at most the size of a bus. If such a spaceship were to be placed inside a planet, there would naturally be nothing more to say. It would be perfect. However, these spaceships were in the universe. The distance they could travel was in the units of light years, tens of thousands of light years, or even hundreds of millions of light years. Compared to such a flight distance and such a size, the disparity was so great that Luo Fan didn't want to notice it. With a slight thought, Luo Fan's perception instantly permeated these spaceships. He could see the specific structure of these spaceships clearly. The structure of these spaceships was completed in a very delicate and wonderful way. The crystal walls that made up these spaceships, after going through various complicated and delicate transformations, released the space-time inside the spaceships. These spaceships looked so small on the outside, but they were extremely huge on the inside. Even the smallest spaceship had a space of a few thousand meters inside. The bigger spaceships had a radius of tens of thousands of miles, enough to contain a continent. The spaceships with small spaces were usually private spaceships. The number of living creatures inside was less than 10. As for the spaceships with large spaces, They were obviously the spaceships of transportation companies. The number of living creatures inside could be counted in the millions or even tens of millions. Those spaceships were almost like a small planet with life. "I see," Luo Fan could not help but exclaim. However, in this situation, he could not help but exclaim in admiration. But it wasn't out of his expectations. The spaceships were made up of all kinds of crystal walls that were originally modified from space-time. Under such circumstances, it was indeed natural to open up a space inside the crystal walls. It was not surprising that these spaceships had such a huge space inside. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. He lifted his foot and took a light step. In the blink of an eye, his figure had already passed through the entrance. Without alerting the defense of the crystal wall, it drilled into the crystal wall. As soon as he entered, Luo Fan was shocked. He hurriedly activated the three-dimensional talisman around his body, forming a tighter defense around his body. In a vast star field inside the crystal shield, in this huge space that was hundreds of millions of light years in circumference, the laws of the universe had changed. This change was very subtle. It felt as if all the laws had been rebuilt, and many strange things had been added to them, causing them to fall under the control of something. Under such laws, this star field seemed to be able to be changed at will, and all the changes that happened in it could not escape the perception of some existence. In other words, this change. As a result, this star field seemed to have a master. It was as if it had become a world created by someone. This was obviously not a good thing for Luo Fan, who wanted to enter the center of the universe to take a look at the source of the demon realm's aura without alarming anyone. The aura of the demon realm seems to have been concealed. Luo Fan sensed it, and such a thought appeared in his mind. He could still sense the aura of the demonic world from the outside. However, as soon as he stepped into the crystal shield, he discovered that the aura of the demon realm instantly disappeared. It was as if the aura of the demon realm did not exist at all. This feeling was really strange, and Luo Fan, who was unprepared, was momentarily confused. The Supreme Divine Land also took the path of a technological civilization. However, this path had clearly been taken to an unbelievable height, reaching a height that no superpower had been able to reach since Luo Fan entered this universe. The other superpowers seemed like countries that had reached an extremely high level of cultivation civilization. However, the Supreme Divine Land in front of him seemed to be a level higher, almost like a dreamlike country. Here, every living creature had a faint connection with the laws that had been modified, and every living creature could rely on this connection to obtain many incredible abilities. They could do many things that ordinary living creatures could not. It was just like flying freely in the universe and moving freely in the void. In Luo Fan's eyes, it was an easy thing for the citizens of the Supreme Divine Land who belonged to the Supreme Divine Land to do so. On this crystal platform, there were many living beings who did not carry any special equipment and were freely moving and flying through the void of the universe. Looking at how accustomed they were to it, it was obvious that they did not think it was a big deal. As for Luo Fan, he could sense through their connection with the laws that they were constantly borrowing the power of the laws to change the surrounding yuan qi, change space-time, and change their own nature. From there, they obtained all sorts of unimaginable abilities. Apart from these changes in abilities, what surprised Luo Fan even more was the way the citizens of the Supreme Divine Land lived. They did not depend on various planets to survive. Their living space was in the boundless space between the various planets in the universe, and not limited to the various planets that were like tiny specks of dust compared to the entire universe. At a glance, Luo Fan could see countless strange buildings appearing in the void of the universe around the crystal wall. Between those buildings, there were citizens of the Supreme Divine Land rising and falling. It was as if the entire universe was the sea of stars, and the buildings were the ships on the sea. Such a scene did not only occur near the crystal wall, but spread throughout the entire star domain, spanning hundreds of millions of light years. Just by looking at it, Luo Fan discovered that the number of such buildings in the universe exceeded the limits of numbers. Among them, the buildings around every star and planet would be relatively densely packed, but in the void of the universe without any support, the buildings would be densely packed. However, in the void of the universe, there were quite a number of such buildings. This is the true race of the universe. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh. The strength of the citizens of the supreme divine land was nothing at all. Not only Luo Fan, but even a cultivator who had reached the immortal realm could easily destroy a large number of them without suffering any harm. However, they formed a strange connection with the laws of the universe, and this connection allowed them to borrow the energy of the laws to exert strength that exceeded their own strength by 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times, or even 100 million times. Under such circumstances, if an ordinary loose immortal were to face them, the slightest carelessness would cause them to perish and their souls to scatter. These are just the ordinary people that Luo Fan had seen so far, who belonged to the supreme divine land. If it was an existence that had a closer connection with the laws, the power they could obtain from the laws would be even more terrifying. Luo Fan could even imagine the entire supreme divine land. There must be a creature that was as powerful as a peak saves to be, or even a terrifying existence that could set foot on the 9th step of the platform. Seeing the state of the supreme divine land, Luo Fan dispelled the idea of going to the depths of the supreme divine land to find the source of the demon realm aura. Instead, he planned to have a complete understanding of the situation of the supreme divine land before deciding what to do next. It wasn't easy to find the source of the aura in the vast star region that spanned hundreds of millions of light years. With a thought, Luo Fan's figure had already landed on a rather shabby building. At least compared to the other buildings, this building was rather shabby. These buildings were the same as the crystal wall cover and were made of the same material. However, as building materials, the structure of these crystal walls was different from the crystal wall parts that made up the crystal wall cover. They didn't have a complex and detailed structure, but in terms of sturdiness, they were greatly strengthened. Indistinctly, they had the effect of greatly expanding the space. Luo Fan smiled faintly. He went forward and quietly opened the door of this building. This building looked like a phone booth from the outside. It was very simple and neat. Compared to other buildings that looked like villas, it was unimaginably different. After a while, the door was opened. A man in tight clothes, who looked extremely futuristic, stood behind the door. He looked at Luo Fan with a very puzzled look and said, "Who are you? I don't even know you." This man used the language of the supreme divine land, which was completely different from any language that Luo Fan had heard in this universe. The tone of the voice contained a strange effect that could trigger the laws. It seemed that with a slight combination, one could use the tone of the language to mobilize the laws to display shocking power. So this is the legendary divine language. It's indeed interesting. This thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. He didn't say much. He raised his hand and pointed lightly. The connection between this man and the laws was instantly cut off. This person was a typical citizen of the supreme divine land. His connection with the laws had long been embedded in the depths of his soul. Now that it was suddenly severed, it was as if he had lost the entire world. He stood there in a daze, unable to react at all. He could not even speak. It's a pity that he only has the power, but not the state of mind. Luo Fan shook his head and swaggered in. She closed the door behind her. This building looked like a phone booth from the outside. However, there was a rather large space inside. Luo Fan roughly looked around. This space was about tens of thousands of square meters, and there were many kinds of technological devices inside. There was also a large circle of densely packed holographic images, which were showing many kinds of lights and shadows. Some of the lights and shadows seemed to be television programs. Some were interviews, some were talk shows, and some were news. What a rich life. Luo Fan sighed inexplicably. He raised his hand and waved gently. The surrounding illusion instantly changed. The space suddenly expanded in all directions. In the blink of an eye, it grew 10 times bigger. It seemed to be a lot wider. At least, the many devices placed here made it seem less stuffy. Who are you? Why did I become like this? At this time, the man reacted. He shouted loudly. Luo Fan didn't say much. He raised his hand and waved gently. The man's memory directly materialized and drilled out of his body. It appeared directly in front of him and spread out like a holographic image. It began to display all the man's memories from birth at an unimaginable speed. Luo Fan's ability was amazing. Even though the speed was unimaginably fast, he could still see all the memories clearly. He was also able to see through all the memories with great ease. So that's how it is. It really is an extraordinary country. After looking at the memories, Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim. At some point in time, the citizens of this country no longer had any lifespan limit. Once they were born, they would obtain eternal life. At least, relatively eternal life. Any loss of life caused by the passage of time would naturally be replenished by the loss. Naturally, they could be replenished by absorbing the energy that was everywhere in the universe. Just like the man in front of him, he had already lived for hundreds of thousands of years. Of course, although life itself was relatively eternal, it didn't mean that they could really live forever. It wasn't the limit of life, but the limit of the soul. Although their bodies and souls could already live forever. But they didn't have the heart to live forever. In the long years of survival, they would gradually get tired of life and gradually feel that living was a kind of torture. Finally, after a certain period of time, they wouldn't be able to bear it anymore and end their lives. Generally speaking, this period was 1 million years. In the whole of the supreme divine land, there were very few citizens who could live for more than 1 million years. Of course, it was very few compared to the population of the entire supreme divine land, which was almost beyond the numerical limit. In terms of absolute numbers, it was still quite considerable. On the internet, the number of citizens who could live for more than 10 million years was as small as the number of citizens who could live for more than 1 million years compared to all the citizens of the entire supreme divine land. Just like that, the number of people who could live for more than 10 billion years in the entire supreme divine land was increasing. Now, in the entire supreme divine land, there is only one person who could live for more than 10 billion years, and that person was called the Great Sage by everyone in the country. This man was also the person who controlled the highest technology in the entire supreme divine land. It was him, and only he, who could control the power to destroy the entire universe. As for the man that Luo Fan was currently searching through his memories, he definitely couldn't live for more than 1 million years. He had just lived for hundreds of thousands of years, and now he already felt that life was a kind of torture. He felt that living like this was a kind of pain. If he hadn't met Luo Fan, he would have ended his own life in a few years, a few decades, or at most a few centuries. Obtaining longevity without the heart of longevity is perhaps a tragedy. Luo Fan smiled faintly. For ordinary people to obtain longevity, this country was naturally quite extraordinary. However, compared to the cultivation civilization, obtaining longevity in this way was still lacking the most crucial thing. Cultivators started from zero and cultivated bit by bit, pursuing the great Tao bit by bit, pursuing longevity. This process also took into account the tempering of the state of mind. Generally speaking, when a cultivator reached the immortal realm and obtained immortality, they would have the heart of immortality. They would be able to enjoy the long life they obtained. They wouldn't feel tired, bored, lonely, or painful because of living for too long a time. However, the citizens of this country didn't go through this process at all. They directly bestowed immortality to every citizen born in this country, completely eliminating the process of pursuing immortality. This made their state of mind remain at the level of a short-lived life. This kind of eternity, this kind of longevity, was really a kind of torture for them. However, that so-called great sage is quite extraordinary. He obtained longevity with the body of a mortal and was actually able to live for tens of billions of years. This heart of longevity is even more resolute than the majority of cultivators who reach the immortal realm. Perhaps I should find an opportunity to meet him. Luo Fan thought, with a faint expression of admiration on his face. After praising, he asked the man, "Do you feel that living is very painful, boring, and tasteless? Isn't it? Every day is a repetition of the past. Everything you see has happened before. The entire world is constantly repeating, and repeating. Everything you see has memories of the past. What's the point of living like this? Isn't living like this a kind of torture?" When the man heard Luo Fan's words, his face showed a deathly still expression as he faintly said. Now, he felt that even if his connection to the laws and principles was severed, it wouldn't be a big deal anymore. Ha ha ha! Luo Fan couldn't help but burst into laughter when he heard this. "What's so funny?" the man angrily retorted. "I'm laughing. A frog at the bottom of a well who has lived for tens of thousands of years actually thinks that there's nothing in this world that he wants to know." Luo Fan smiled. Chapter 1156. Luo Fan naturally could not be bothered to argue with him. He casually waved his hand and used the laws of the star domain that had already been changed to form a small person in front of him. After this small person appeared, he shook his head and rolled on the ground a few times. His entire body was enlarged by 10 times, becoming the size of a normal person. He was completely naked, but did not have any sexual characteristics. He looked like a man on the surface. After this person appeared, he looked around and said, "What is this place? Why am I here? Oh, and who am I?" The furious man was dumbfounded by this entire process. How is this possible? This kind of performance clearly shows that it already has true intelligence. It's a true intelligent being. How is this possible? He stared blankly at the figure that had just been casually created by Luo Fan. His face was filled with disbelief and disbelief. He took a few steps forward and carefully touched the person that had just been created. His expression kept changing as he felt that it was extremely soft to the touch. As a life form that had been learning about the supreme divine land for the past 100,000 years, he felt that there was nothing he did not know. He was confident that he could find an explanation for everything he saw, no matter how unbelievable it was. However, he simply could not understand the process of the emergence of such an intelligent being. No matter what knowledge he used to explain it, it would cause serious contradictions. So how could he keep calm? "Who are you? Why are you touching me like this?" the newly created life form asked. "Do you feel anything? How do you feel when I touch you like this?" The man's eyes were wide open. He asked as if he was looking at an enemy. "I feel itchy. You are really strange." The life form pointed at the man and said with a smile, "The ability I used to create, it was the ability you originally had," Luo Fan said calmly. After saying that, he did not bother to say anything else to this person. With a slight thought, he controlled the interior of the building and started to undergo various huge changes. Soon, this place became a small world. It was completely different from before. It had a sky and a land. There were mountains and rivers. There was even a small world of insects, fish, birds, and beasts. It had become full of vitality, and there were no longer any traces of it from before. You seem to have the authority to head to any place in the supreme divine land apart from the core region. This is an unexpected gain. Luo Fan said something that the man couldn't understand at all. Then, the man felt the building that looked like a phone booth start to shake. Then, he felt as if he had entered a high-speed flight. However, at this moment, the man no longer cared about what this phone booth-like building looked like, nor did he care about what the man in front of him wanted to do. At this moment, all of his attention was focused on the newly created life in front of him. He kept asking this life form some questions. Some of these questions were extremely simple, while others were extremely complicated. Some were simple but contained complexity, and some were complex but contained simplicity. Over and over again, he kept asking questions. Fortunately, this newly created black life form was like a piece of white paper. It was currently working hard to absorb all the knowledge of the outside world, and it was working hard to absorb nutrients from the conversation with the man. As such, it did not reject the repeated and complicated conversation. It did not show any impatience, and it patiently answered all of his questions. After a long time, the man finally let out a long sigh and said, "As expected of true wisdom, I'm really a frog at the bottom of a well. It's already right in front of me, but I still don't know how it's done." At this moment, the loneliness, the faint sense of decay, and the despair of having no interest in anything that he originally had disappeared without a trace. Instead, there was a sense of defeat mixed with joy and hope. "I finally found something that I can pursue. I've decided that my goal in the future is to use my ability to create life." He shouted loudly, "What do you mean by creating life? What's the meaning of those questions you asked me just now?" At this moment, the newly created life form opened its mouth to ask. It seemed to have matured a lot compared to before it was questioned, and its eyes were no longer as blank as before. Those questions just now were the test questions that our supreme divine land has sorted out over the past tens of billions of years. As long as one isn't a truly intelligent life form, it's impossible to pass this test. As long as one is an intelligent life form, regardless of their level, they will definitely be able to pass this test, the man explained. "Ah, then am I a truly intelligent life form?" The life form was shocked and hurriedly asked. "Of course you are. Of course you are a truly intelligent life form. In fact, your life grade is even higher than that of many of the supreme divine land citizens. Your test results are of the highest grade." The man said, "Haha, then I'm relieved." The life form laughed out loud, seeming to be very happy. At this moment, the man discovered that his originally restricted abilities had been completely restored at some point. In other words, his originally severed connection with the nomological laws had been completely restored. If this man had recovered his strength at the beginning, he would have fought Luo Fan with all his might. However, at this moment, he realized that Luo Fan's mastery of this ability was many times better than his. How would he dare to do that? With a sweep of his gaze, he saw Luo Fan standing inside the building that had completely changed. Luo Fan, who was looking at the ever-changing light and shadow in front of him, hurriedly ran forward and knelt on the ground, saying, "I beg you, sage, to teach me the method of creating life. As long as the sage is willing to teach this technique, I am willing to pay any price to obtain it." Shindeng was obviously the man's name. From the man's memories, Shindao already knew that the names of the citizens of the transcendent divine land usually contained words like God, Saint, Buddha, Tao, and so on that represented holiness and nobility. The fact that the man in front of them was called Shindeng was not surprising at all. A method to create life? You want to learn this? Do you know who I am? Luo Fan did not look back. He continued to use the various communication mechanisms of the building to link to the core database of the entire transcendent divine land, searching for some special and abnormal areas in the transcendent divine land. "Yes, I'm willing to pay any price to learn this. As for who you are, I don't care." Shindeng was still prostrating on the ground. "I said I'm a cultivator. I am the enemy of the entire universe. I am the public enemy of the universe that all the superpowers want to get rid of. You don't care about this?" Luo Fan smiled slightly and finally turned his head to ask. These words, Shindeng could not help but tremble. He suddenly raised his head and looked at Luo Fan. It was as if he wanted to see traces of a joke on his face. Unfortunately, what kind of existence was Luo Fan? How could his thoughts be clearly seen by the person in front of him? This was what he saw. However, it was just Luo Fan's expression that seemed like a smile, yet not a smile. It was impossible to see what he was thinking. He had originally guessed that Luo Fan was from some special force and might not be an orthodox citizen of the transcendent divine land. That was why he was so mysterious and needed the help of an ordinary person like him to get to the place he wanted to go. But he did not expect that the person in front of him would say that he was a cultivator. He did not know how to react for a moment. What kind of existence a cultivator was to this universe might be a secret to the citizens of other countries. At most, they only knew some superficial things. But for the citizens of the transcendent divine land, the largest superpower in the entire universe, this was common knowledge. It was common knowledge that everyone knew. Shun Deng naturally knew the attitude of this country and the attitude of this universe towards cultivators. There was no doubt at all. Cultivators were the cancer of a universe. They would be the source of the destruction of a universe and the direct cause of the disappearance of this universe era. This concept was deeply ingrained in Shun Deng, who had lived for more than 100,000 years and could not be shaken anymore. Under such circumstances, even if he had made up his mind to learn the method of creating life at all costs, he could not help but hesitate. Luo Fan stood there and did not rush him. He quietly waited for the person who called himself Shun Deng to answer. Countless chaotic thoughts kept reverberating in this divine Deng's mind. The joy and fulfillment he had felt when he had started learning more than 100,000 years ago. The boredom he felt after learning for thousands and tens of thousands of years. The pain of constant repetition. The despair he felt after hundreds of thousands of years. The insanely torturous feeling of everything being repetitive. Everything reverberated in his mind. Finally, all these thoughts turned into the scene he had just seen. The person in front of him had casually clapped his hands and created a brand new life that could pass the strictest test for intelligent life since the Supreme Divine Land was founded. He finally made up his mind. He gritted his teeth and said, "Whether a sage is a cultivator or not, I won't change my mind." After saying that, the person seemed to relax a lot. An inexplicable brilliance was released from his body, and his connection with the law layer suddenly became much closer. The power that he could grasp was at least 10 times stronger than before. Shun Deng instantly sensed this change and couldn't help but reveal an expression that looked like he was smiling, yet not smiling, crying yet not crying. "I didn't want to talk to you after you hesitated for so long." Luo Fan smiled faintly. Shun Deng's various expressions turned into panic when he heard that. However, Luo Fan did not stop there. He continued, "However, I'm a little interested in the fact that your determination will make your connection with the law layer closer and allow you to grasp more power." Shun Deng's expression relaxed a little after hearing that, but he was still very nervous. He was afraid that Luo Fan would say something that he could not accept again. "If you learn this method, you will become a cultivator. Even if you don't behave as extreme as me, you will definitely behave like a cultivator. You might be rejected by the entire universe and the Supreme Divine Land. If that's the case, do you still want to learn it?" Luo Fan continued calmly, "I'm willing." At that moment, Shun Deng no longer hesitated. The previous psychological struggle had already made his mind firm. He had already struggled with what Luo Fan said, so he naturally did not need to hesitate anymore. Hearing that, Luo Fan smiled faintly and did not say anything else. He raised his hand and pointed. A speck of spiritual light rushed out from his hand and drilled into Shun Deng's mind. It exploded instantly, causing Shun Deng's entire mind to sink into a boundless universe. This was a boundless universe, not a real universe. It was a universe of laws. He had been in contact with it for hundreds of thousands of years. However, he had never really seen it. He had never seen this universe of laws clearly. In his eyes, the entire universe had become a universe made up of all kinds of lines. In this universe, there was everything that he had come into contact with in the past. All the knowledge that he had heard was also more knowledge that he did not understand. This is the truth. Tears flowed down his eyes uncontrollably. The vast universe in front of him had completely removed the veil that had been covering his eyes, allowing him to clearly feel the profundity of the universe like never before, as well as the insignificance of what he knew. At this moment, he felt that there was nothing more he could learn from his previous arrogance. Everything that happened in the universe had already happened, and there was nothing to be surprised about. This mentality made his face flush red with shame. Calling me a frog at the bottom of a well is already flattering me. I'm simply a frog whose eyes are covered by leaves at the bottom of a well. All I see are 2 leaves, and I think this is the entire universe. As he thought this, his eyes were extremely greedy as he looked at the universe of laws in front of him. At this moment, the universe suddenly trembled slightly. In the blink of an eye, it completely collapsed. Seeing the universe of laws that Shun Deng praised as the truth collapse, Shun Deng's mind almost collapsed as well. This was simply like placing a treasure that he had dreamed of in front of him and then casually smashing it. That feeling was truly exhilarating. No, he only had time to let out a scream before the entire universe changed completely. The lines that formed this universe, which were the countless laws of laws, almost completely disappeared at this moment. What was left were only a few lines of laws that formed hundreds of words in front of him. The language used in these words was not the language of this supreme divine land, but the language used by the cultivators of Earth's universe. Of course, Luo Fan would not accommodate this person in front of him and use his language to impart his wondrous techniques to him. However, although this Shun Deng did not know this language, he could easily read these hundreds of words and clearly understand the meaning of these words and the profoundness of these words. It turns out that my body is unable to withstand the impact of facing the truth directly. I need to seek the power of laws to continuously improve myself so that I can withstand it for a longer period of time. If this had lasted for a few more seconds, my entire head would have been roasted and my entire body would have exploded. That was close. Shun Deng came back to his senses. He felt somewhat indignant, but also somewhat fortunate. These hundreds of words were a cultivation technique that Luo Fan had imparted to him. This technique had been casually created by Luo Fan, but it was the most suitable and exquisite technique for the citizens of this supreme divine land. This technique described how to use the power of laws to temper one's body and improve one's life essence. In the end, one's body would become so strong that one could see the laws of laws at any time and find the laws of laws that one needed. As long as one could cultivate this technique to the highest realm, one would naturally be able to find the laws that could create life among the countless laws of laws. When that time came, one would naturally be able to casually use the power of laws to create true intelligent life, like Luo Fan had done. In this aspect, the technique that Luo Fan had imparted to him was better than the technique that Shun Deng had requested. After all, when this technique was cultivated to the highest level, not only would it be possible to create life, but it would also be possible to create a world. However, there were still citizens of the Supreme Divine Land who could use this technique. This was because they could already connect with the laws and borrow the power of laws to do all sorts of unimaginable things. It would be very difficult for other living beings, even cultivators or itinerant immortals, to achieve this. Only golden immortals could barely do it. Under such circumstances, even if a cultivator obtained this technique before reaching the golden immortal realm, their cultivation prerequisites would not be sufficient, so it would naturally be of no use. On the other hand, in the golden immortal realm, the effects of this technique on body refinement were useless. So, this technique was extremely precious to the citizens of the Supreme Divine Land, but to cultivators, it was useless and useless. After reading through the technique, Shun Deng once again prostrated himself on the ground and thanked Luo Fan profusely. You should know how dangerous this technique is after reading it, right? Luo Fan said indifferently. Chapter 11:57. Luo Fan nodded and said, "Since you know, I won't say much. Go and cultivate on your own." Shun Deng was extremely grateful to Luo Fan, so he immediately retreated carefully and sat down in a corner of the small world. He began to cultivate quietly using the cultivation method that Luo Fan had taught him. After Luo Fan dismissed Shun Deng, he began to focus on searching for the source of the demon realm's aura in the Supreme Divine Land. As the source of the abnormal aura in the entire universe, no matter what characteristics it had, there would definitely be abnormalities. It was impossible for it to be exactly the same as the other locations. The greatest possibility was that it was in the center of the Supreme Divine Land, which was also where the core region was located. However, this was only a general situation, and it did not mean that it was definitely there. Hence, Luo Fan controlled the building to fly towards the core region while searching for the various abnormalities in the supreme divine land. As a superpower, a great nation that transformed all the rules and laws in the entire nation and gave power to every citizen. It was obviously not that easy to find some special and unusual places among them. At the very least, there were no such records in the database. However, this was not a problem for Luo Fan. With his intelligence, as long as there were clues, he would naturally be able to speculate the entire situation. Therefore, not long after, Luo Fan had already locked onto 3 positions outside the core area. This location reduces the ability of people to borrow the rules and laws here by nearly half almost every time. Someone has gone missing here before. Although the remaining location doesn't show any abnormalities, the probability of someone entering this place becoming insane has increased by more than 10%. Every location could be the source of the demon realm's aura. Luo Fan thought to himself as he locked onto the 3 locations. Among the 3 locations, the one that increased the probability of someone becoming insane by more than 10% happened to be on the route of the building to the core region of the Supreme Divine Land. He could explore it along the way. Therefore, Luo Fan did not need to think too much about it. He adjusted the flight direction of the building slightly. The citizens of the Supreme Divine Land did not live on the planets, but in the universe as their living space. Therefore, in the process of the building flying towards the core area, it almost did not encounter a truly empty area. Almost every now and then, 1 or 2 buildings would appear in the starry sky. Moreover, these buildings were not usually alone. Instead, he set up all sorts of devices in the void of the universe. There were all kinds of equipment. Some seemed to be cultivating something. Some seemed to be collecting some kind of energy, and some were conducting some kind of experiment. They were all profound and unfathomable. It revealed the deep heritage of a highly advanced technological civilization. If it was in the past, Luo Fan would definitely be very interested in these things. He would stop and study them before continuing his journey. However, at this moment, because he had the memories of Shun Deng, who thought that he had learned all the knowledge in the Supreme Divine Land. Therefore, he could understand these things at a glance. He did not need to stop at all. With the help of the building's detection ability, he could instantly find out what was going on and review the various creative ideas revealed in it to deepen his understanding. Under such circumstances, the flying speed of the building was increased to the limit. Although the building was extremely small and looked like a phone booth from the outside, it was far inferior compared to other buildings that looked like mansions. However, its flying speed was enough to shock advanced countries and superpowers in the outside world. In order for a country to maintain its integrity and true stability, it must at least have the means to be able to send people to every location in the country within 1 or 2 days. This was the only way to ensure the long-term peace and stability of the country. Because of the high level of technological civilization in this universe, there was no need for the vast countries in the universe to strictly conform to this principle. However, it cannot be too far off. It did not take 1 or 2 days to send people to any place in the country, but at most, this time could only be extended to 10 days to half a month. If it took any longer, then there would definitely be rebellions at the borders of the country from time to time. All intelligent creatures had their own selfish motives, and there was no exception to this, no matter how highly civilized the country was. It was obviously impossible to hope that everyone's ideological consciousness would be raised to the point where they would wholeheartedly serve the public and not rebel. The Supreme Divine Land would not be an exception. To be able to maintain such stability and long-term peace for tens of billions of years, this country had the ability to send anyone from any place in this country to any place in other countries within half a month. In other words, this nation possessed the ability to traverse an unknown distance of billions of light years in half a month. This was the highest transportation capacity of the entire country. Although this building in Shundang was not a specialized flying transportation machine, it was not too far off. Of course, it was impossible to travel across the entire country within half a month, but it would definitely not be a problem to reach any place in this country within a year. Under such circumstances, It would normally only take this building half a year to fly from the huge crystal shield at the borders to the core of the supreme divine land. 2 months after they set off, Luo Fan had already controlled this building to fly a distance of 30 to 40 billion light years, covering a third of the distance. They arrived at a strange area. Could this be the area occupied by the research organization in Shun Deng's memories? Luo Fan could see the outside world through the building's detection ability, and he could not help but have a thought. This thought flashed through his mind. In the area ahead, there was an extremely vast area the size of almost 100 galaxies. Countless strange buildings were arranged in an extremely orderly manner. Between these buildings, countless energy strung all the buildings together, outlining an extremely huge, complex, and vast three-dimensional network. In the cosmic void within the network, there were all kinds of strange substances and energies that were constantly undergoing various complicated changes. They seemed to be probing the rules and laws and studying the various secrets of the rules and laws. This kind of behavior was described in Shun Deng's memories. It was the behavior of a civil organization that did not belong to the government in the supreme divine land. This should be a sect from a technological civilization. Luo Fan flew like this for 2 months out of boredom. At this time, he was a little interested in this sect from a technological civilization. He controlled this building that looked like a phone booth to listen in on the huge area ahead. There were many buildings in the huge, three-dimensional network the size of 100 galaxies. According to Luo Fan's estimation, there were at least hundreds of billions of them. However, this was not all the buildings in this area. Outside the three-dimensional network, there were even more buildings suspended in the void. They did not join the three-dimensional network. However, they existed by relying on the huge three-dimensional network. Every building was inextricably linked to the three-dimensional network. In Shun Deng's memories, such a scientific research organization existed. It was at the bottom of the supreme divine land and was not really a big organization. There were countless such organizations in the supreme divine land, so many that it was beyond imagination. The scale of those really big organizations was at least 1,000,000 times larger than this. The three-dimensional network they formed might even occupy a small part of a galaxy. That would be shocking. The reason why Luo Fan only found such a small scientific research organization 2 months after he set off and traveled 1/3 of the distance was because he was walking in a straight line and passed through many gaps. That was why he was blocked by this organization. Not long after Luo Fan stopped the building, a building that looked like a small wooden house with an empty space in front flew in front of the phone booth. Then, a middle-aged man walked out of the door of the wooden house and rushed to the phone booth with a beam of light. Luo Fan knew that this was a signal to communicate, which was quite refreshing. Anyway, he was going to stop here for a while, so it was not a big deal to come out and communicate. Thus, he smiled and took a step forward, arriving at the door of the phone booth and opened it. As the door opened, the man chuckled and controlled the wooden house to move closer to the phone booth. There was an empty space in front of the wooden house, so the phone booth was naturally placed there. "I'm Shingo. Friend, you look unfamiliar. May I know where you're from?" The man chuckled. "Luo Fan. I'm from the border. It's my first time here. May I know what this place is?" Luo Fan asked with a smile. Although almost everyone in the supreme divine land was named with words like God, Saint, Buddha, and so on, the population of the entire country had exceeded the limits of what numbers could describe. Naturally, there were many people who didn't like such names. Although they might have been given such names by their parents, they still changed their names. Therefore, Luo Fan directly told him his real name. The man was not surprised to hear it, but his eyes lit up slightly, and he said, "This is the Creation Research Institute, the most prosperous place within tens of thousands of light years. There are many places in front that are forbidden areas for the Creation Research Institute's experiments. If you accidentally trespass, I'm afraid it will be very dangerous. If my friend needs, I could be your guide." Be a guide? Luo Fan suddenly realized why this person had come over to greet him so enthusiastically. It turned out that he wanted to make money. However, he was really too hungry to be picky with his food. The building he chose was only the size of a phone booth, but this man's building was like a small wooden house. Just by looking at the surface, he could tell how big the difference was. This man came forward to ask if he needed a guide. This was like a rich man driving a BMW asking a cyclist on the road. "I'm familiar with this place. How much money do you have to pay me? I'll be your guide." Life is really not easy. Luo Fan sighed slightly. These words came out of nowhere, and it took Shingo a while to react. He couldn't help but blush, and he said, "Yes. Although living in the Creation Research Institute allows me to get in touch with many of the latest technologies and obtain more knowledge and resources, the cost of living is much higher than outside. All right then, if I ask you to be my guide, what price do I have to pay? What price do I need to pay?" Luo Fan just sighed casually. After hearing this person's words, he said so. If Luo Fan wanted this so-called research institute in front of him, he could just cover it with his perception. He would know everything about it. He didn't need any guide at all. However, here, in the Supreme Divine Land, Luo Fan didn't know whether their highest technology could detect his existence. If they could, if he covered it with his perception, wouldn't that mean that he was here? In that case, although it wouldn't necessarily cause him much harm, it would definitely cause him a lot of trouble. This was naturally not what he wanted. Moreover, he was not in a hurry. The reason he was searching for the source of the Devil World's aura was not only to find traces of the Devil World, but also to pass this trial path. More importantly, it was to gain experience. He wanted to find things that would help him progress in his cultivation realm from all kinds of experiences. Since that was the case, there was naturally no need to go directly to the destination. They would stop along the way and hire a guide to waste some time, but it was also a good choice. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan directly agreed to this statement. The man was overjoyed when he heard this, and said, "Only 10 rule points a day." Rule points were the currency used in the Supreme Divine Land. Any country, even if it grew to the height of the Supreme Divine Land, currency was indispensable. Luo Fan didn't have such a concept before. After hearing this term, he searched through Shun Deng's memory and found out what rule points were. In fact, rule points weren't the currency issued by the Supreme Divine Land like credit points. Instead, they were a product that was condensed by using a common method to practice the laws. This was actually the fundamental energy source of the entire Supreme Divine Land. It was also the source of energy for the many creations created by the countless crystal walls. Just like the building that Luo Fan was in right now, a single rule point could allow this building to fly at full speed for a distance of 1,000 light years. One could imagine how amazing the effects of these law points were. Luo Fan calculated it and found that if he calculated it according to energy, a rule point was actually equivalent to all the energy produced by the explosion of a hydrogen bomb. At this time, Luo Fan also understood that the person in front of him lived in a much better place than Shindeng. After seeing Shun Deng's phone booth, he actually came to visit him so enthusiastically. Why did his eyes light up after hearing that he came from the border? This place was 30 to 40 billion light years away from the border, and flying here from there would cost as many as 30 to 40 million rule points. An existence that could spend 30 to 40 million rule points to rush here could only be low-key even if he lived in such a simple place. It didn't mean that he was poor. At this thought, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile bitterly. It turned out that he didn't think it through clearly and actually thought that the person in front of him was so hungry that he couldn't be choosy. However, for Luo Fan, the law points were something that could be condensed from the law layer with just a slight thought. He really had as many as he wanted. He was too lazy to care about whether the 10 point a day was too much or not. So he nodded and agreed to the deal. When Luo Fan agreed to this deal, the Shun Go was overjoyed. "Friend, you have made the wisest choice." After the deal was completed, their identities were no longer the same. The Shun Go directly asked if Luo Fan had any goals and what he wanted to obtain so that he could arrange the itinerary according to Luo Fan's requirements. Luo Fan naturally didn't have a specific goal, so he directly said, "I don't have a specific goal. I just want to walk around here and see the characteristics of the Creation Research Institute." This kind of request was obviously what the guide liked the most. The Shungo's smile became even wider, and his whole body was filled with inexplicable joy. The Creation Research Institute is a research organization that has been established for 30 million years. Although it isn't ranked in the entire Divine Land, it is the #1 organization within tens of thousands of light years. The entire organization has more than 120 billion members, and the number of people who rely on this organization is 3 to 4 trillion people every year. The biggest characteristic here is a kind of house renovation technology, the Shungo said quickly. House renovation technology? What's so special about it? Luo Fan asked curiously. Houses were obviously buildings that everyone had. For example, the phone booth in Divine Land was the simplest kind. The Shungo's cabin was also one of them. The mansions and even the hill-like villas were also one of them. It's very special. However, I can't explain it in simple words. Friend, why don't you follow me into my room? As long as you see it with your own eyes, you will know what the technology is, the Shungo said enthusiastically. Enter your room? Your room has also been renovated by that technology? Luo Fan couldn't help but ask curiously. Chapter 1158. Luo Fan was naturally indifferent. He nodded and said, "Then let's see." The seigneur was overjoyed and stepped into the small wooden house with Luo Fan. Of course, this small wooden hut only looked like a small wooden hut, but it was still made of various crystal wall materials that were modified by space-time. It was the same as the phone booth in Goddang. The crystal wall was the foundation of the supreme Divine Land, the supernation civilization. As soon as he stepped into the small wooden house, his eyes lit up. The room in front of him was not like the room in Goddang, which was a sci-fi room. Instead, it was like a boundless starry sky. In the center of this starry sky, there was a platform that was tens of thousands of square meters in size. All kinds of instruments, special equipment, furniture, and so on were placed on this platform. Is this the result of the modification? It doesn't look like much. Luo Fan frowned. There was a boundless starry sky around him. What was the difference between this and the outside world? For cultivators, it might calm their minds and allow them to enter a state of enlightenment faster. But for ordinary people, this was not a good choice. After all, ordinary people did not just need peace. The boundless starry sky would only bring them loneliness and desolation. Haha, friend, you misunderstood. The seigneur laughed as if Luo Fan had scratched an itch. After laughing, he waved his hand and the entire starry sky changed instantly. It became a huge room again. The style of this room was similar to the original room in Goddang, but it was more luxurious. There were also more equipment. During the whole process of this room changing, Luo Fan instantly grasped the essence of it. He knew the root of this change. At this moment, a source of power in a certain location in this room shook slightly, instantly activating the program originally loaded in this room, causing the room to change naturally. This is the effect of the modification. It looks pretty good. Although this transformation effect was just a slight effort for Luo Fan, it was, after all, quite an interesting creativity. Therefore, Luo Fan was not stingy with his praise. This modification allows the room to be freely chosen from a wide variety of scenes. Because I have a limited number of law points, I can only load 3,000 scenes. The Holy Goblin sighed and waved his hand again. The surrounding light and shadows changed rapidly. The entire room suddenly turned into a boundless desert, then into the surface of a huge star, then into a boundless ocean, and then into the surface of a satellite without any atmosphere. Suddenly, it turned into a forest, and suddenly, it turned into a boundless grassland. All kinds of things. It was truly unpredictable. This whole process didn't require the Saint Construct to consume any power at all. All of this was caused by some kind of change in the source of power in that room. This was the preset program in this room. The transition between two scenes was very natural. It was very fast, and it was a complete change, not a change that spread out from the source of the power and affected the entire room. This is the effect of the house renovation technology. How about it? Are you interested? The Holy Rune smiled and said, I'm indeed interested. However, I don't want to modify my own room. This room has a lot of significance to me. I want to keep it the way it is. Luo Fan smiled. This made the Holy Goblin's face collapse. However, he didn't have any resentment. After all, some things were very personal. It was normal for others to want it or not. However, Luo Fan's next words made the Holy Goblin's face change. How about this? Where can I find a house here? I'll buy one first, and then carry out the modification. Luo Fan smiled. This made the Holy Goblin stunned. After a while, he couldn't suppress the ecstasy on his face as he said, "Yes, yes, yes. Every research organization has a place to make houses. If you want to buy it directly, you don't need to modify it after buying it. You can directly buy a house that has already been modified. If you buy it this way, not only will it be convenient, but there will also be a lot of discounts. The overall price will be much lower." Luo Fan didn't need to think too much to know why the Holy Goblin was so ecstatic. If he bought anything from this research organization, the Holy Goblin would get a certain amount of commission. From Shun Deng's memory, Luo Fan already knew that once any citizen of the Supreme Divine Land was born, they would receive the necessary living resources for free. Not only would they be able to establish a direct connection with the nomological law layer, but they would also be able to obtain the most ordinary and simple room. This room was actually only a little worse than Shun Deng's room. With such living resources, even if this person never had any communication with the outside world, he could live almost forever. If this person wanted to live a better life, he would have to work hard to condense law points and spend a huge amount of law points to exchange for various living resources and rooms. Just like the housing prices before Luo Fan transmigrated. Although the Supreme Divine Land was extremely rich in resources, the price of a room was enough for an ordinary person to condense law points for thousands or tens of thousands of years to afford it. And this was the worst room. If it was like a luxurious house, the price would have to be increased by several times or even 10 times. An ordinary person could generally condense 10 law points a day. After deducting the necessary living expenses, they could at most have 5 left. From this, it could be seen that a house would cost at least 10 million law points. Such a huge number. Even if the Holy Goblin could only get a commission of 4% or 5%, it would still be at least 400,000 to 500,000 law points. For a Holy Goblin who could only earn 10 law points a day as a guide, such a huge harvest was very rare and lucky. One could imagine how happy he was. In his ecstasy, the Holy Goblin's voice trembled as he said, "Friend, if there is nothing else. Friend, if you don't have anything else, why don't we go to the house now?" Luo Fan smiled slightly. He was quite interested in the Holy Goblin's excited expression. He nodded. "I don't have anything else to do. Let's go this way." "Okay. Friend, you don't have to go back." After my room was modified, although the flying speed didn't increase by much, you can see the outside world as if you were there. It should have some advantages compared to ordinary rooms. "How about I send you there directly?" the Holy Goblin said. "That's fine." Luo Fan nodded. The Holy Goblin finally heaved a sigh of relief and waved his hand. The light and shadow around the entire room instantly changed and turned into a strange starry sky in the blink of an eye. This starry sky was very different from the starry sky that Luo Fan had seen at the beginning. There was a huge three-dimensional network in this starry sky that was the size of hundreds of galaxies and was composed of buildings, or rather houses. It was a scene outside the house. After seeing this scene, the Holy Goblin controlled the small wooden house and began to fly towards the three-dimensional network. The number of houses that made up this three-dimensional network was unimaginable. However, after all, the space occupied by the entire three-dimensional network was too wide, so the space was not densely packed. There were still many passageways for people to pass through. These passageways were actually the passageways of the buildings in the three-dimensional network. Although this research organization was very strict and built such a large number of buildings into such a complete network, it didn't mean that this research organization completely restricted the freedom of its members. However, that did not mean that the research organization completely restricted the freedom of its members, nor did it mean that these buildings could not be moved. Even on the Earth before Luo Fan transmigrated, it was impossible to restrict people from moving, not to mention that the supreme divine land had developed its civilization to such a high level. Of course, it was impossible to restrict their freedom of movement. Shingo was obviously quite popular among the people of the Research Institute. As he passed through the many buildings, he noticed that Shingo was quite a popular figure. As he passed through the many buildings, greeting signals were sent from time to time. Although the Holy Goblin said that he was in a hurry to go to the house to earn his share, he still had to live here in the future, so he sent some signals to communicate with them. After a while, he crossed the thick residential area and entered the three-dimensional network of the research organization. Just as he stepped into it, a building in the three-dimensional network that didn't look luxurious, but it was very square. It looked like a square building, and it emitted a red signal. When he saw this signal, the Holy Goblin was a little nervous. He quickly performed a complicated operation, and the small wooden house sent a blue signal, which was received by the square building. After a while, the building emitted a green signal that enveloped the small wooden house. At this time, the Holy Goblin sighed in relief and explained to Luo Fan, "This is a necessary inspection. If I wasn't a guide, I wouldn't have passed so easily." After entering the three-dimensional network, a strange field appeared around the small wooden house, restricting the small wooden house to a fixed route. It looked like a train that was restricted to a railway track, flying towards a target at a moderate speed. This route was not a straight one. Instead, it was a series of twists and turns in the three-dimensional network. Obviously, the Holy Goblin still didn't forget that he was a guide, so he wanted to introduce the various features of the research organization to Luo Fan. Luo Fan was happy to do so. Seeing these various features was also a kind of experience for him, and it could add to his cultivation. "What if I'm not a guide?" Luo Fan asked curiously after hearing the Holy Goblin's words. "Well, you'll know when you see it." The Holy Goblin smiled and pointed behind him. Luo Fan looked back and found that behind him, there happened to be a building that looked like a thatched hut that was entering the three-dimensional network. However, compared to the Holy Goblin's small wooden house, which only received and sent out signals, the thatched house was not so relaxed. It was completely covered by the cube-like building, and a red signal was emitted from it, covering the thatched house. Then, a few people came out of the cube and directly entered the thatched house. After a while, they came out and made a few hand gestures. The light emitted from the cube turned slightly yellow. Then, a few more people came out of the cube and replaced the previous people. They went into the thatched house again. After a while, they came out. This time, they directly returned to the cube. At this time, the cube emitted a green signal covering the thatched house. At this time, the cube emitted a green signal covering the thatched house. It was only at this moment that the straw hut was allowed to enter the tunnel inside the three-dimensional network. There's still a need to check. But why do they have to enter in two groups? Can't they check at the same time? Luo Fan asked in surprise. Everyone has their own specialties. The focus of the two groups is different. The first group is to check for dangerous items, while the second group is to check for devices like spies. That should be the case. That's what they say, the Holy Goblin said. Luo Fan chuckled and did not deny it. The inspection of the founding research institute was so strict. Since so many people were willing to enter like this, it seemed that there should be a lot of benefits. This is a wind energy field. Usually, it will gather a lot of strange wind, which is extremely spectacular. Unfortunately, the Research Institute seems to be doing a special experiment today to suppress these changes. The Holy Goblin explained to Luo Fan while pointing at a seemingly calm green lake next to the tunnel. Nice scenery. Luo Fan looked at it and just smiled. The Holy Goblin might not be able to tell. However, he could tell at a glance that this place had clearly guided the various laws of wind in the laws of the universe and combined them with the various stray energies and astral energies in the universe to form this wind-attributed liquid energy. This kind of energy was quite powerful, but it was only powerful. For cultivation, it was not very useful at all. There were too many impurities in it. Although they all carried the characteristics of the wind because of the rules of laws, because they were different forces, the nature of the wind was also different. And this difference would cause the conflicts between these forces. Because of this so-called wind-attributed energy field was able to produce all kinds of spectacular scenes during normal times. If this kind of power was absorbed into the body, it would not be able to temper the body at all. Increasing the effects of one's body would only result in the destruction of one's body. Shun Goblin did not know that Luo Fan was looking down on this wind energy field. After introducing the characteristics of this energy field, he left with Luo Fan and continued to go to the house. Along the way, they passed by many plasma energy fields, Sea of Earth, Light Wave Formation Area, Sea of Fire, and many other special attractions of the founding Research Institute. These attractions were not in a state of tranquility like the first wind energy field. Instead, they vividly displayed their various characteristics. Shun Goblin was beaming with joy as he introduced them. Although Luo Fan looked down on them, he also admired the creativity of the founding Research Institute. Around each of the attractions, there were usually a few buildings, and no one knew what they were doing there. There were even a few attractions with many people pointing at them, as if they were planning something. The deeper they went into the Research Institute, the more active the buildings were. Obviously, the deeper they went, the livelier it was. In the end, it was simply rubbing shoulders with people, and there were many roads where people had to queue up to pass. It was quite like a traffic jam in an ordinary city. There are hundreds of billions of people here. Even if it's only 1,000th of the usual activity, there are still hundreds of millions of people, so we still have to wait. Shun Goblin was very embarrassed about this small traffic jam, so he carefully explained to Luo Fan. Luo Fan just smiled at this. It's just a few seconds. What kind of traffic is this? If he were to apologize just like that, he would probably have to kowtow to apologize if he knew that he was stuck in traffic for hours in the cities on Earth before he transmigrated to this world. His nonchalant attitude made the holy construct admire his magnanimity, and he couldn't help but express his gratitude and praise. Not long after, the cabin brought Luo Fan and Shun Goblin to a huge building. This building was much larger than ordinary buildings. It was many times larger than even those mansions. The entire building looked like a huge ball. Shun Goblin's cabin looked like a ping-pong ball in front of basketball. The difference was huge. This is the house, Shun Goblin said to Luo Fan. Then let's go in. Luo Fan smiled slightly. Okay, please wait a moment. Shingo couldn't contain his excitement. Then, he controlled the small wooden hut to release a blue light that entered the huge building. The huge building directly opened a door that could accommodate the small wooden house. Through the gate, one could see that there was an extremely vast starry sky inside the huge building. Shun Goblin controlled the cabin to enter the door without hesitation. After entering, he saw a spiral ring in front of him. On the ring, there were many people strolling, talking, or pointing at the bubble-like stars that existed in the universe. The place where the cabin entered was at the bottom of the spiral ring. Chapter 1159. After parking the house, Shungo led Luo Fan to the spiraling ring that spiraled around the entire spherical space. Not long after the two of them set foot here, a man in uniform hurried over and greeted them enthusiastically. I'm a shopping guide here. My name is Xinguang Ji. Friend, you're here to choose a house, right? You've definitely made the right choice by choosing here. The types of houses here are definitely the most complete in the surrounding millions of light years. No matter what kind of house you want, friend, you'll definitely be able to find it here. The man was not ugly, but he was not too handsome either. At most, he was pleasing to the eye. The moment he opened his mouth, everyone felt as if they were bathed in a spring breeze, and they naturally let down their guard. Xinguang Ji obviously knew about Shingo. Hence, he did not greet him, nor did he care about what he did. He just greeted Luo Fan. Shingo was a guide, and his task was just to bring Luo Fan to the place he wanted to go. As long as he reached the destination, Shingo's task would be considered completed. Hence, after the shopping guide came out, Shingo did not say anything. He just followed Luo Fan and watched quietly. He did not say anything, nor did he make any decisions for Luo Fan. Luo Fan was quite satisfied with this. He smiled and said, I'm very unfamiliar with everything about the founding Research Institute, and I'm even more unfamiliar with this house. I'm not too sure what kind of houses there are. Why don't you give me a specific introduction first? Naturally, Luo Fan did not come here because he lacked a house. The fundamental reason he came here was to see the types of houses in the supreme divine land and study whether there was any creativity that he could learn from. Flying all the way from the border of the supreme divine land, Luo Fan had seen all kinds of buildings. The total amount would probably need to be calculated in the trillions before it could be calculated clearly. However, among the buildings he had seen, 80% of them were duplicates. Although there were a lot of houses, there were not many types. Not to mention that it included all the forms of houses that existed in the supreme divine land. Therefore, that was why he was willing to follow the Saint Construct to take a look. Otherwise, if he really wanted a modified house like the one mentioned by the Shungo, he could create it with just a thought. He could even create a house that was thousands of times more mysterious than the one mentioned by the Shungo. Why would he need to come here? Regarding Luo Fan's request, Shen Guangji did not find it strange at all. Things like houses were easily calculated with tens of millions of rule points. No matter how wealthy one was, it was impossible for him to not treat it with caution. Do more research. It was only natural to have more experience and more choices. What's your budget? I don't mean to offend you. It's just that there's simply too many types of houses. Knowing your budget, I can quickly allocate the houses you need to choose from, Shun Guangji said with a smile. The budget is undecided, from the worst to the best, as long as they were pleasing to the eye. I can accept it, Luo Fan said lightly. The worst and the best? Shen Guangji's face stiffened when he heard that. The worst would be around 10 million rule points, while the best would be billions. It was even possible for it to be tens of billions. This difference was simply too huge. He could not help but suspect that Luo Fan did not have any sincerity in buying the house and was purposely here to make fun of them. However, although he had such a thought as a shopping guide, he would not fall out with Lin Fan because of his professionalism. In any case, even if Lin Fan was just making fun of him, it would not be a loss to him. He had eternal life. Even if he was made fun of for a period of time, it would be insignificant compared to his eternal life. If Lin Fan was not lying and really wanted to buy the house, it might even be billions. Tens of billions of houses would be a huge harvest for him. Just the sales commission alone would be enough for him to not have to work for the rest of his life. Under such circumstances, his face stiffened for a moment before returning to normal. He said to Luo Fan, I see. Friend, please come with me. Let's start with the basic houses. When Luo Fan said that he had not decided on the budget and that he might want the simplest, worst, or the best house, Shungo's expression changed slightly. Shungo had not known Luo Fan for a long time. His understanding of Luo Fan was based on Luo Fan's own words and his own speculations. He was not very sure if Luo Fan was really a tycoon and could really afford to buy a house. He had only brought Luo Fan here because he was looking forward to it. Now that he heard Luo Fan's unreliable answer, he could not help but suspect that he was being cheated. Would he be a pauper? As he thought about it, his expression became uglier and uglier. Suddenly, he felt a little regretful. He regretted bringing this person here without doing a thorough research. If this person had really looked around once and had no intention of buying a house, then although he wouldn't be punished by the real estate agency, it would definitely affect the relationship between him and the real estate agency. In the future, if he brought people here again, the treatment would probably be much worse than before. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Shungo's expression became uglier and uglier. However, since it had already happened, he could only hope that this person who called himself Luo Fan really wanted to buy a house like he thought, and was not just fooling around. Shun Guangji led Luo Fan and Shun go up the spiral ring. Soon, many bubble-like things appeared around the ring. Luo Fan glanced at these fist-sized bubbles and knew that they were made of crystal walls. However, compared to things made of crystal walls like houses, the crystal walls used by these bubbles were extremely thin and completely transparent. The crystal walls contained within them were extremely weak, and they released almost all of the space-time within them. Inside the bubble, There was a space that was neither too big nor too small, forming a thin, transparent barrier on the outside. Inside the bubble, there were houses after houses. Obviously, these bubbles were used to store houses. It was a shelf that was especially used to place houses. The houses inside were also real houses, and there were also the goods that were being sold in the real estate sales office. Very good. Luo Fan looked at these bubbles, and such a thought flashed through his mind. The space-time of these bubbles and the crystal walls were in an extremely delicate balance. As long as the slightest bit of power was touched, the bubbles would collapse. As long as there was a little bit of force, these bubbles would naturally collapse and release the houses inside. The compressed space-time of the crystal walls would instantly return to normal and fill in the space of the houses inside the bubbles. No matter where they were placed, even if they were placed in a small space that could only accommodate a bubble, they would still be able to easily accommodate the entire house after the crystal walls were broken. Luo Fan looked over. The interior of this housing agency was as huge as a starry sky, and it was densely packed with such bubbles. With just a glance, Luo Fan could estimate that there were more than 1 trillion of these bubbles. There are actually over 1 trillion houses for sale, and they dare to boast that the types of houses here are the most complete within 1 million light years. They really do have something to rely on. Luo Fan looked at these bubbles. He could not help but think so. This filtering barrier is not bad. To be able to completely filter out these bubbles and only appear when one is close to the edge, this is a method different from the cultivation civilization. Luo Fan raised his hand and gently touched the invisible barrier in front of him, such a thought flashing through his mind. It was very easy for cultivators to achieve this. They only needed to set up a formation, and they would be able to achieve this. However, for a technological civilization to achieve this, it would require countless complex considerations and all sorts of special transformations. It was not that simple. Shen Guangji looked at Luo Fan's actions, and the worry in his eyes became even more intense. This kind of distance filtering technology was something that any slightly larger store would have. This person claimed that he wanted to buy houses worth billions or even tens of billions, but he had never seen such a technique before. How could Shen Guangji not suspect that Luo Fan was a scammer? Shen Guangji's worries naturally did not escape Luo Fan's notice. Luo Fan only felt that this kind of suspicion was funny and interesting, but he did not feel offended at all. He would not even think of changing their minds. He would still do things his own way. This was just the entrance of this housing agency. The houses that appeared here were all simple, in other words, low-quality houses. The levels of these houses were about the same as thatched huts, log cabins, and even phone booths. Of course, at this level, they would naturally have all sorts of strange and unique characteristics. Some of the houses were like phone booths. Some were square and looked like phone booths made of wood, while some looked very sci-fi and modern, making people yearn for them at first glance. The same went for log cabins, thatched huts, and the like. There were all kinds of them, and some of them seemed to be quite high grade. Although Shen Guangji was worried, his professionalism was still there. He didn't slack off and continued to introduce the many houses to Luo Fan. Don't be fooled by this house's simple appearance. Its internal space is 100,000 square meters, and it can be equipped with 300 kinds of landscapes. It's really a cost-effective house. And this one, although the space inside is relatively small, only 8,000 square meters, it can be equipped with 3,000 kinds of landscapes. Shen Guangji pointed at the bubbles nearby and kept explaining to Luo Fan. Luo Fan listened to this explanation and combined it with his own observations and senses, gaining a deeper understanding of these houses. Most of the characteristics of these houses were cliché and had nothing to recommend them for. However, there would be 1 or 2 flashes of light from time to time, which made Luo Fan feel like he had gained something. He nodded while following Shen Guangji along the spiral ring. His expression was calm and composed, without showing any signs of fuss or disdain. It was as if he didn't know that the houses in front of him weren't valuable enough to make someone go bankrupt, but were just ordinary goods. Both Xinguangji and Shungo saw his performance. For a moment, they felt that Luo Fan was unfathomable. The doubts in their hearts seemed to have been dispelled. For a life form that only needed rule points to survive without sleeping, eating, and having no lifespan limit, the concept of time was naturally different from that of ordinary creatures. 3 meals a day. It was no longer necessary. The distinction between day and night became even more blurry. Hence, Shen Guangji explained to Luo Fan for 3 to 4 days. Gradually, they were halfway through the spiral ring, but he still didn't feel impatient. Even though Luo Fan didn't express anything along the way, he didn't say anything. He didn't say anything either. It was the same. For a business that could easily earn hundreds of thousands or millions of rule points, even if it was a waste of time, it was still acceptable to the sales guide. Not to mention 3 to 4 days, even if it was 3 to 4 years, he wouldn't feel impatient. As long as he could close the deal in the end, Shen Guangji would be willing and wouldn't feel impatient. You're just a country bumpkin. Why are you pretending to be a big-tailed wolf here? Just as Luo Fan was quietly listening to Shen Guangji's explanation of the characteristics of this villa-like house, a voice suddenly entered their ears. Luo Fan's heart moved, and he knew that the person who spoke was after him, a customer who had entered this house within the past 4 days. He turned around. He saw 5 people standing not far behind him. Among the 5 people, one of them had a very similar aura to a divine construct, so he was clearly a guide. One of them looked similar to Shen Guangji, so he should be the sales guide. Of the remaining 3, one was a middle-aged man with a fat head and big ears. The other was a woman who appeared to be extremely charming, her clothes revealing more than half of her breasts. And the last one was an old man who had an extremely close connection with the law layer. I didn't expect that there would be such a thing in the supreme divine land. There's actually such a thing. Looking at them, such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. The fat middle-aged man was obviously a rich man. The charming woman next to him in revealing clothes was obviously the woman who had a very close relationship with the rich man. The old man behind them had a very close connection with the law layer, so he could definitely mobilize a lot of the law layer's power. He was most likely the rich man's bodyguard. What Luo Fan felt was the relationship between this woman and the rich man. However, it was just a sigh. In any world, in any country, whether it was a planet or a vast country like the Supreme Divine Land, the gap between the rich and the poor was unavoidable. Since there was a gap between the rich and the poor, there would naturally be some people who would sell something and rely on others to survive. Some people would sell their bodies, some people would sell their abilities. After a glance, he smiled faintly, turned his head again, pointed to a pyramid-like building in front, and asked Xinguangji, "What's so special about that building?" Xinguangji was slightly startled. He obviously did not expect Luo Fan to ask this at this time. One had to know that most people who were provoked like this, even if they did not retort, they would definitely do something else. It would be like this person who did not care at all and acted as if he did not hear anything. However, he quickly reacted and hurriedly said, "This building's unique characteristic is that it gathers energy from the universe to replenish its internal energy source. Its internal space is 100,000 kilometers wide and has a recyclable ecosystem. Even if it doesn't need any rule points, it can guarantee to exist for more than 100,000 years. Moreover, there are 30,000 types of landscapes to choose from. You can even combine these landscapes to create a world." Luo Fan nodded inwardly. The pyramid structure was in line with a certain law of the law layer. With such a structure, it could indeed gather the power of law. Luo Fan's disregard for him was simply an insult to the pretentious rich man, especially at this time, when he wanted to choose a house for his woman as a gift. It was a naked slap to his face. How could the rich man tolerate this? His face instantly turned red. After a while, he said to the old man behind him, "Teach him a lesson." The old man behind him glanced at the rich man and said, "This is not within the scope of my service. I am only ensuring your safety. Becoming a hired thug? That is not my duty." The rich man was even more furious when he heard those words that didn't give him any face. "I am your boss now. How dare you not listen to me? Don't you want to work anymore?" he shouted angrily. The scantily clad woman beside him hurriedly hugged his arm and said gently, "Boss, calm down. The background here is not simple. I am afraid it is not convenient to make a move here. He is also worried about bringing trouble to the boss, so he is not willing to make a move." This woman's voice was so charming that it made Sheng Go, who was next to Luo Fan, hold his breath, and his breathing became heavier. Even the shopping guide, Shun Guangji, had a rather unnatural expression. Obviously, he was affected by the woman's voice.